Okay, we're going to go ahead and start since we are already 8 minutes late. I apologize. We will try to stay on target and on track. So welcome to the Finance Committee. First, let's do introductions around the room. It's always nice to know who is here and hanging out with us. So let's start over here. Tamara, let's start with you.
I'm Tamara Daly. I work at USBE on the school fees policy.
Sorry, I'm Brett Baltazar. I work for school finance.
Okay.
Amy Barrett, I'm the school finance director here at USBE.
IT director at USBE.
Gary Shoemaker with USBA, School Boards Association.
It's fantastic. Charter schools.
Okay, let's start in the back.
Curry Roads, Cache County School District.
Cache County? Oh, I totally forgot that. Thank you.
Ben Smith, Panorama Education.
Chad Carpenter, Ogden School District.
Utah Education Association.
Jay Blaine hung in there with us last night till 12:15. So
David Stringfellow with the Auditor's Office.
Ann Nolay, also with the auditor's office.
John Dougal, State Auditor.
okay, and then we have our board members. And I'm not even sure I can talk about this, but when he walked in today in uniform, I was so moved after talking about Normandy all day yesterday and thinking about that. I was just so moved that he would serve us. So anyway, so thank you for coming today. Michelle Bolter will join us online when she can, and Chair Huntsman will be here as soon as he can. He has a project he's working on right now. So first of all, we're going to start with 4.1, it's an informational item. It's Project Kids. It's the key integrated data system that's being done at the auditor's, Auditor Dougal's office. And so we'll have their presentation, and then committee members, you can ask questions that you'd like to. And then if we have time, we'll let the audience have, if they'd like to make a statement or ask questions. So I'll turn the time over to you. If you'd introduce yourselves again before you speak, that would be helpful for our record keeping.
Sounds good. John Dougal, State Auditor. I'm here with David Stringfellow, my chief economist, and Ann Nolay, who's one of our excellent research analysts in the office.
Okay, just be careful with your knees on that bar. You're the only one who's safe, probably.
Okay.
There you go.
They're brutal, trust me.
And I'm going to turn the time over to Ann to give our presentation today.
Thank you.
Okay. So Project Kids integrates financial, operational, and performance data to improve data-driven decision-making. There are two important questions that really drive this project. The first question is, where did the money go in public education? And the second question, how well was it spent? Now, these two questions are the most common questions that get asked of Auditor Dougal, and so they lie at the heart of this project. The second question, how well was it spent, is a very important question for policymakers, for the public, for LEA personnel, and school boards. And with Project Kids, we're not answering this question necessarily, but we're empowering stakeholders to be able to have information to answer this question themselves. So we're not placing a judgment on this money was well spent or this money was not well spent, but rather we're providing a non-normative tool for stakeholders to ask more informed questions and improve data-driven decision-making. So for example, let's say a school board decides that math instruction and performance is one of their strategic objectives. Well, they might ask, do our financial resources align with our strategic objectives? Are we putting the resources we want to towards math in order to reach our strategic objectives? Or perhaps another objective might be to focus on a certain group of students, like students that are at risk. So the school board might ask, what resources are reaching these students at risk, and how are these resources helping these students perform? Or finally, which subjects or classes consume a disproportionate amount of resources? How much are we spending on football relative to our core academic priorities? So these are just some examples of some questions that can be answered.
That's never asked, but it's all hypothetical.
And we apologize for eating during your presentation.
problem.
Quickly open your bag, so, because I know that was bothering you. I'm sorry, Ann, but
Go ahead
it's,
and pull it out.
going to
Put the
be,
bag on the floor and then we'll be good to proceed.
There you go. I was just waiting there. I'm like, I'm not busting anything out until Mr. Jones gets going.
so I apologize.
I don't mind at all. Please eat.
Okay, so,
So anyway, so these are just some examples of questions that might be asked that really get back to that main question, how is the money being spent? So in order to help stakeholders answer this question, we answer the first question, where does the money go? At this point, policymakers and the public are used to looking at education finance at the LEA level. How much is spent at the school district? And with new reporting guidelines, we're getting better information about school level spending, and we're very excited about that. But with Project Kids, we dive deeper. We look at subject level spending. If I were to ask right now, how much does the state of Utah spend on math? That would be a very difficult question to answer, but with Project Kids, we can start gaining insights like that to answer those important questions. We also look at teacher and classroom level spending. So how much does Mrs. Smith's 7th grade math class cost in relation to Mr. Jones' 7th grade math class, and how does that tie in with performance? And then finally, and most importantly, we really drive all of the dollars down to the student level. So we take every dollar that's spent in the district, drive it down to the student level so we can start building it up in meaningful ways to look at teacher, classroom, subject, and school level spending. And to drive the dollars down to the students, this requires integrating a lot of key data resources. Now we know there's a lot of data, there's a wealth of data about public education out there, but it's currently siloed in different systems and different formats. And so we collect and integrate these key data resources from several different sources. We get data from the Transparent Utah website, from our office. We get a lot of data from the State Board of Education, and we get data from the LEAs themselves. Now, from our office, from the Transparent Utah website, each LEA is required to upload transaction level information on their expenses, so we have very detailed information on how they spent their money. From the State Board of Education, we get detail on students, student demographics, student performance on standardized testing, course and enrollment data, so what classes each student took and what teachers they had. And then we also have information on teachers. What is the teacher's license level? What are their years of experience, and so forth. And then we do request some information from the LEAs themselves, such as detailed compensation information about salary and benefits. If it's available, we like to get child nutrition program information on how many lunches or breakfasts a student ate. Bus eligibility, was this student eligible to ride a bus or not? And detailed information on grades and other pertinent assessments to that district. So we take all of these different data resources, we integrate them together, and then we drive the dollars down to the students. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to walk through a brief example of our cost allocation methodology of how we take the dollars and bring it to the student level. So in this example, we're looking at Mrs. Smith, who's a high school math teacher and a volleyball coach. Now, Mrs. Smith has $50,000, that's her contract salary. She gets $25,000 in benefits, so insurance, retirement, and so forth. And then she gets a $2,500 coaching stipend for her volleyball team. So how do we drive these dollars down to the students? How do we allocate her compensation? First, we take the non-instructional portion. So the $2,500 coaching stipend will not go to the students in her math classes, but it will go to the students on her volleyball team if we can identify who those students are. The other $75,000 will be allocated to her math classes. So Mrs. Smith actually teaches 6 year-long math classes, and here they are. So that's $75,000.
That's a lot of prep.
She's a busy woman. And each of her math classes gets 1/6 of the $75,000 of her instructional compensation. So $12,500 per section. And from there, we drive it down to the students. So for example, her Geometry 2 class has 24 students, but 2 of those students were only in the class for half of the year. Maybe they moved, maybe they went to a more challenging math class. For whatever reason, they were only there for half of the year, and we allocate that $12,500 down to the students based on how long they were in the class. So the students that were there for the full year receive twice the allocation of the students that were there for only half of the year. Now, this is just an example with one teacher's compensation, but we take every expense and we drive it down to the students in a similar way. So some large expenses, district administration or operational expenses, those go to all students because all students benefit from that. But when we can identify specific populations of students that benefit from expenses, maybe a special education program, a dual language immersion program, then we allocate those dollars to the students that participate or benefit from those resources. And at the end of the day, each student receives an allocation of in a lot of different categories. So we see some examples of categories here. There are a lot more. But for example, teacher pay, transportation, administration, athletics, nutrition, and so forth. And every student receives unique allocations based on their unique circumstances. So to highlight that, we can see the student in blue did not receive any money for transportation expenses because that student was not eligible to ride the bus, whereas the other two students were, and so they were allocated money of transportation expenses. The student in green was a student who required special education resources, and so that student has an allocation for special education programs, whereas the other two do not. And so when we allocate all of the dollars down to the students, we can build it back up from the bottom up and look at different levels of spending. And I just really want to emphasize that this is from the bottom up, not from the top down. We're not taking X amount of dollars were spent in this school district, there were X amount of students, and dividing it over those students, but we're really allocating the dollars down to the students based on what they participated in, what classes they had, and which teachers they had, and then building it up from the bottom up. So that is a very brief overview of our methodology and the work we put in to come up with the framework. But what have we done so far? So the first phase of this project was a really deep dive. We worked very closely with Park City and Logan City school districts to understand what data was available and also what data was important, what data mattered in our methodology. In the second phase of the project, we asked, well, how can we take what we learned in the first phase and scale this to different types of LEAs? And so we worked with LEAs of various sizes and demographics. We worked with Ogden School District, Juab School District, Grand, Canyons, and Cache, and I see some familiar faces here. And so in phase 2, we worked to refine our processes and scale what we learned in phase 1, scale it out so it wasn't such a deep dive to understand what we could do to provide meaningful information to LEAs. And what we produced are visual data dashboards that show this integrated data resource. And these dashboards are targeted for school district personnel and for school board members. And they include a lot of sensitive FERPA level data. And so the intended audience was just the school district personnel. And they were intended to facilitate improved decision making using the data that we stitched together. So those are the school districts that we've worked with to produce those dashboards. And the dashboards are hosted securely online, and personnel that have access to it can log in and look at different views that look at district, school, classroom, teacher level spending, and play around with the education data and start answering that important question, saying where is the money going and how is it being spent. So I'm actually going to walk through a demo of some of these dashboards that we put together. Before I do so, I just want to be clear that what I'm showing is a representation of a school district. It's not an actual school district.
Okay.
No real kids.
Yeah, just because of FERPA, we have to protect
Say
the
no
data.
more.
So it is a
We want to
representation.
give you the concept without disclosing inadvertently.
So if you don't recognize the school names, they're not actual schools. And then also there's a lot going on these dashboards, and just due to time constraint, I would love to get into every detail, but unfortunately won't be able to. And so I'm just going to walk through some of the highlights of what we can look at from the dashboards. And I apologize, probably go through it pretty fast. There's a lot going on, so let's jump over to it. All right, what we look at here, and I apologize if the text is small for those in the back, is we're looking at total district spending broken down by category. So we can see the large categories such as teacher pay, which makes up 35% of this fictitious district's expense, and we can look at very small categories like women's volleyball, for example. And if you click into teacher pay, you can see how this district, what they're spending on teacher pay across the years, as well as total teacher compensation broken down by school. We also can take a deeper look into one specific school. So in this instance, we're looking at Shasta High School in the year 2018. And what we're looking at here is spending by subject and spending by classroom. So each of these bars represents the total course-related expense of math, for example. So in 2018, Shasta High School spent $1 million in math expenses and about $300,000 in science. Now that is total. We can also look at average expenses to say, well, on average, a year-long math class costs $30,000, and on average, a year-long science class costs about $21,000. So if this district has a strategic objective or a priority to focus on science, they can look at, well, we're not putting as many resources towards science as math. Is that what we intended or not? And what pops up over here, each one of these dots is actually an individual classroom. So if we look at biology, for example, if I hover over it, the dots that are highlighted are all of the individual biology classrooms. So if I look in on one of those, this is Marcus Johnson's first period biology class, and we can see that it costs $17,000. Now, we can also dive a little.
We can also see there were how many students in the class as well? About 20?
19 students in the class. Yeah, so I should have mentioned here on this, we're looking at class size versus expense. And if we're really interested in a specific subject, let's say one district is very interested in getting low-income students into calculus. We can click into calculus here and hone in on just calculus to see how much is being spent on calculus over time, what are the demographics of the students that are enrolled in calculus, and what are the calculus courses that are being offered. So we can see here that 13% of the students enrolled in calculus are low-income students. Maybe this district has a total of 25% of their students that are low income, and so they can look at this number and say, how can we be getting more of our low-income students into calculus classes? And you can click in and see more detail on any of these subjects. Now this is a view into one specific school. We also offer a view where you can put two schools side by side.
Is this your Harry Potter music or something that kicks?
I don't know. Michelle?
I'm on. I got kicked off for a minute, but I'm back on.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That makes sense.
That's what's happening.
So with this particular view, there's a lot going on, and I'm not going to go into every detail, but we can put two schools in one district side by side and look at different indicators about expense and also student performance. And we can compare one school to another or one school to every school in the district as a whole. So yes.
I just need this one. Does this go down to comparing teacher to teacher, or just for finances, or for performance as well?
We integrate both of those.
Let us get there in just a moment.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want the screen to go away.
Okay.
Next, we're going to
One
look
of
at
those high-performing students that just wants to jump to the end.
So I talked a lot about student level spending in my introduction presentation, and so we do offer several different views that really hone in on student level spending. And so what we're seeing here, each of these lines represents a school in the district, and we can see what the average spending per student was for any given school in any year. So in this example, Sierra Middle School in 2017, on average spent about $6,000 per student. And these distributions over here are for the whole district, and we can see that $6,000 was the median that was spent on students. But what we were talking about, this is really from the bottom up, not from the top down. So we can see that some students require a lot more resources than others. Right. And so we can look into those distributions. And if we're really interested in just Sierra Middle School, you can click in and the distributions change so that we're only looking at a specific school in a specific year. And we even go deeper with student level spending. And you can actually, we have a different view here. Let me click over to it, where you can look on one specific student. Now you can see why I'm not showing real data here. But each of these bars represents one student in the district. And I've focused in on one student here, and what pops up is the resource profile. Similar to those charts that I had in my presentation, we can see the allocations of what type of resources are going to that student. We can also see the student's schedule, which teachers did they have, what classes did they take, and how many days did they attend. And then spending over time. Has our spending on this student been consistent over time? Why or why not? And then we have a lot of different filters here. We're looking at all students. You can filter to look at only English language learners who were not proficient in language arts, or special ed students at a specific school. There's a lot of different options of different student cohorts you can look to say, what are we spending on this cohort of students, and how does that compare to what we're spending on everyone? And finally, the last view that I have here is where we take performance data and we tie that in. So all of the other views were really heavy on expense. How much are we spending at these different levels? Well, this takes classroom and teacher level spending and ties performance data in as well. So there's a lot going on here, but we're looking at 7th grade math in 2018 in the whole district. Each one of these little people is a teacher that teaches 7th grade math, and we can see their compensation against the average GPA of all of their students. We also incorporate SAGE testing information. So what pops up over here is the student growth percentile of the students of this teacher to understand, is this teacher, how are they helping their students improve? And then what pops up at the bottom are the proficiencies across the different test subjects, so language arts, mathematics, and science. So this teacher that I'm looking at right now, 62% of all of their students were proficient in mathematics. And this view looks at just the teachers, but if we're interested in classroom level spending and performance, you can toggle it over. So now we're looking at all of the individual class sections of the teachers as well. And so with this view, there's a lot of interesting questions that can be answered by looking at this. Sometimes we see instances of grade inflation. Maybe a teacher is giving really high GPAs and their students aren't performing as well on standardized testing. We understand there's a story behind every one of these data points. These represent people. These are teachers. These are students. And the district personnel who look at this often know those stories. Maybe we put this teacher with a low-performing cohort on purpose to help them improve. And we can look at these measures of improvement or proficiency to understand what was happening and where the money was going down to teacher and classroom level and how that ties in with performance. So I know that was a lot. And those are just some examples of some of the views that we have built in and handed off to different school districts already. So what's next? Well, in the third phase, which is the phase we're in right now, we're working on deploying this tool across all districts and charter schools in Utah. We're working on data collection so that we can start integrating that key data and driving the dollars down to the student level. We will deploy that very similar looking tool for LEA personnel. And then we also create custom dashboards when requested. So sometimes an LEA has a data resource that they really care about, or maybe an assessment. We can integrate that and build a custom dashboard based on the preferences of the LEAs. And then the view we looked at was very targeted for district personnel and has a lot of sensitive data. So we're looking at taking a step back and developing use cases for other stakeholders, such as the State Board of Education or the legislators or the governor. We're asking, what could a public-facing view of this look like? And then a view for researchers or advocacy groups. And so that's what we've done so far and where we're going with this project. Once again, the goal of this project is to answer the question, where does the money go in public education, to empower stakeholders to answer the second question of how well is it being spent.
Thank you so much. I was lucky enough to spend an hour and a half with them and ask myriads of questions, and I still have more. So, do committee members have any questions they'd like to ask? I know that was fast.
Yeah.
Sean?
A couple questions. One is, looks like you've identified some gaps that are in our current system, correct? Can you come up with any metrics to how to measure how those gaps are being filled currently? What's the system in the districts that you're working with this?
I think one of the key questions there when it comes to those metrics is we're not trying to say this is the right answer and this is a wrong answer.
Yeah, but make it visible.
We're trying to say, here's what happened, here's what's going on through data that sometimes was in different silos that you couldn't pull together. So then they can start seeing those gaps to say, how do they want to address whatever gaps they see or whatever shortcomings they might see. Hey, this isn't really accomplishing what we thought. What do we need to do to put more resources or more focus on this area?
Well, I don't want to point fingers. I was just trying
Yeah.
to make sure that's the kind of information that they were receiving from
Yeah.
it. And
In
based
fact, we
on-
worked with one who the business administrator was aware of, where they had held off on some busing allocation, other things like that, and their data showed it. But the board members hadn't remembered this decision they had made back in the past, that it kind of altered their transportation spending. But all of a sudden, the data showed it.
And I like the ease in this. So at the very end of using data for the folks that go in there, is there a portal for them to go in and say, look, this is a summary I want, and they can select specific summaries?
Yeah, there's a capability to comment and give feedback on views, and then also request a new view that maybe we can build custom for them. And we will
And you might
provide-
even envision at some point, certain school personnel might even develop their own custom views themselves.
And we will provide training and resources as well on how to interpret this, how to access it, and all of that, because it can be a lot.
How receptive has data and information? Because sometimes it's hard to find out that apps, and you already mentioned it, you're not doing this to be punitive, you're doing it to illuminate some of these issues. So what kind of feedback have you received?
Can I just throw, didn't Box Elder and Park City, were those the two?
Logan
Logan.
and Park City.
Logan and Park City. So is
Yes.
Logan here today? But Todd is from Park City. Should we ask the business administrator what his take is on it?
I was asking, that's why I was asking if there was some
We appreciate
feedback.
working with Park City and Todd and their willingness to help us with that deep dive.
Todd, do you have any comments for us?
No microphone.
It's here.
Trust me. I'm Todd Hauber, Business Administrator for the Park City School District. It's been a great experience to go through. Ours was the school district that had the bus example that Auditor Dougal just called out. It was good to go through and see
Try
some
not
of the
to name
data.
names.
Yeah, no, I'm owning it. And so from that standpoint, it's been great. The data, to be able to see those different charts, to do that deeper dive, gain a better understanding is helpful. Some of the challenges often gets into the data and how it's interpreted. So in the process, I've asked a couple times to make sure that whatever the data book is that describes how this data is pulled together is something that school districts and especially business administrators, because I'm sure questions will come in as to why is it this way? And we won't know unless we understand how the data was pulled together. So that'll be a key piece of information that we will need so that we can field questions as they come. Sometimes you have weird anomalies, and they're just that. It's just a weird anomaly. It's not that there's some crazy business going on. There's anomalies in the system. I like the dashboards. I had a chance to give some feedback on the dashboards. Appreciated that opportunity and tried to give some insight onto how those might be used and how it would be beneficial. You definitely have different user groups. So you have internal users, whether it's administrative staff, program staff, teachers themselves looking to see how effective things are. And then you have an external view. So you have the public that's coming in with a different mindset, different perspective, wanting to understand what's happening, programs, outcomes, and how effective different things are within the district. And there's not a single dashboard that covers all of that. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops as you go forward. Internal look is, what the external look is. So at the end of the day, we understand what's going on.
Okay, so I have another, Sean, do you have a question for him?
So one of the other questions, let me just jump on. So I think big picture is there are some LEAs that are really excited about what this means, and there's others that are still trying to get their arms around the concept of, okay, we're seeing data much more visible than we've seen it before. How do we use it? And we're very early in the implementation on this.
My last one would be, you talked about having that external access. Are you close to developing that?
We have not gone down that path yet. So very close now. But recognizing we need to start figuring out what that path looks like. One of the key reasons we're here is to start to get feedback from the State Board of Education about what views would be beneficial from your perspective, your governance and your oversight.
Okay. Terry, did you have some?
No, I think,
Or questions?
now we have people who tested them. I will probably spank you. And I think having a question, someone who's actually looked at it and worked out of his office is helpful for this. And I've seen it and understand it too. I do believe, Auditor Dougal, you have or will have presented this to the business industry. Yes or no? We look forward to that at this point. Business administrator group as a whole.
We have not presented to them as a whole. More than happy to present as soon as they're ready. But we have started reaching out to all the rest of the LEAs to start working with them.
I think that's the next step in terms of.
This is that phase 3.
Yeah.
We are scheduled to present to you
When are we scheduled?
in July.
Okay, July we're scheduled to present.
Straight.
Then you are. Did you have some questions?
No, I like this. I think it could be not only for accountability measures, because I as a school teacher, I just see this as like, oh, this helps us be more accountable with what we're doing, like in specific departments. But also, I think it'd be tremendous for districts, principals to identify those gaps. Hey, we need to allocate resources here because of these gaps that we're facing. So I think it's a great system so far.
Okay, questions about rural or small schools. What has their take been on how much work this has caused for them to pull up, because they have a whole section of information to give you?
That's a great question. So we try to minimize the burden on the LEAs to an absolute minimum. So we reach out usually to the business administrator. We get 4 key contacts. We reach out, we work with them to understand in a phone call what data is available, how easy would that be to pull the data together, and if it's a very large burden or not available, we don't push it further than that. So we take what the data is that's readily available that they can produce those reports that they're used to producing. So as far as burden on the LEAs, it's not more than a couple hours, and those are spread across different people at the district.
And I just comment too, often the small districts in our experience don't have the abilities or the resources to produce something like this that combines all this data, where some of the largest districts maybe have some tools that intersect these kinds of abilities, and creating a common platform that does it uniformly across all districts, all schools. We see that as maybe a useful ability that spans all kinds of sizes and capabilities of different districts.
I'll be interested to see what kind of feedback you get from the UASBO and see what their concerns might be. I have a question about the data collected. You're going out and you're gathering it. How often are you going to update it? And is it an auto update? How is it going to stay current and reliable?
Right now, we're doing a multi-year, grabbing multiple years at a time to say, here's the point you have, let's say the financial transparency website information. At that point forward, let's grab everything you have today that's appropriate in, to this concept of annually getting a micro update.
And do you know how that would happen yet?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So
One of the other key things I want to also make clear is, I know you've had a lot of discussions about ERP systems and other things like that. We're not trying to change anybody's accounting system. We're just trying to take the data as it exists and stitch it together.
or doubling up, Jared, if this is functional and it's good and districts like it, why would we double up on the efforts? Why, it become more synergistic in that?
Or if you have a different system that better integrates data, then you start to put these dashboards on top of that.
Right. So I think it could be real complementary. Sean,
There's a lot of learning to do walking down this path. So
I don't know, but I find it exciting thinking that we're going to look at a student and find out how much they cost and go up, rather than just dropping money and trickle it. I love the concept. So, anybody else?
Oh, I
Does
dig it.
anyone-
Go ahead.
I'm curious about, I'm tech nerd, but I like this stuff. And I was just trying to wonder, when you gather some of this data, is to have it connected to existing systems, but pulling information at a tie-in. I don't know if you've that, or is that one of the channels that you're going to be looking at, so that you don't have to go through and do that additional work done during these processing kids into each of the schools?
Yeah, and that's definitely a channel we haven't gone down yet, but would love to explore that. So right now we're collecting extracts of the data, but in the future, if we can streamline that more, that's definitely something that we're interested in.
That's kind of
There's a way to integrate, for example, with your systems. So it's kind of
And there
a
might-
dynamic.
Yeah, because I'm thinking from the business side of, like, even as soon as it comes in, it's already placed, it's going, it's already allocated, all the data's there.
Mm-hmm.
And do the same thing with students. I'm not gonna do the same thing with the students, and it's being registered. You know which classes are going to, which teachers, and now you have all that information.
And I'll just
It's simple.
I'll just mention that we are pulling from USBE's data systems already
Okay.
to get that information, but it's not real-time integrated. So
Getting it back to.
correct. So we are accessing that same kind of system, which would mean we could integrate those more closely at some point in the future if that was a desirable collaboration.
And there are some LEAs, perhaps small, that still have paper. May not have it all. So yeah, no, that's very fun.
Okay, anybody else? Jay?
Just a quick comment, Jay Blaine with Utah Education Association, and they were gracious enough, I was able to go into their office for a demo of the system as well, and there are, when you start talking about different applications for data like this, just to be cautious of overextending the applicability of this to things that where the first interpretation of the data might think it's obvious, but then there's underlying things that may not be quite as obvious, and we need to be careful about some of those initial interpretations. When you talk about accountability, as we've learned with test scores, can be interesting. I'll just say that.
Perfect. That always works perfect.
And I know, I totally understand what you're saying,
So-
Chair Belknap, and I think you're getting my,
I appreciate that, yeah, because
So-
what we do with it and where does it go? And do we need to put limits to start and then?
but it is, the data's going to be very helpful in looking at situations and analyzing it from the district perspective and maybe from your perspective as well. But always remember, there's underlying situations that can be very, need to be analyzing and looking at very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Royce?
Royce Fantasso with the Charter School Association. I maybe want to just put a little bit of a fine point on some of what Jay had indicated. Last year, some of you may be aware, the Taxpayers Association started putting together a charter school spending report. This is a great report. One of the things that we learned in pulling that together was some of the limitations to that. And then what we noted as we were going through and we look at some of the ratios, we're like, well, it's really hard for me to believe that you've got 7 charter schools where less than 50% of their operating money is going towards teacher salaries. That just didn't make sense. And as we dug down, in every instance where that was the case, the accounting had been done entirely appropriately. But accounting principles and the chart of accounts that the state and the feds have adopted allows LEAs to make some decisions about, for example, at times where what seemed like capital expenses can be accounted for. And every time we saw those weird ratios, we're like, well, we trace it back, oh, they bought a building, and this LEA, for whatever reason, made that decision to put the dollars over here. And that can skew the numbers in important ways, not necessarily good or bad, but the ratios will look odd. And so to Jay's point about making sure we know what comes in, and then how we compare those and what information we take, at times things are gonna look a little bit weird, and none of this is to say it's good, bad, or otherwise, but to recognize the meaning of them isn't always what it can seem. So.
I appreciate
that. And you know, it's a question, I think that the Taxpayers Association had talked to your staff about, you know, should we be more precise or prescriptive in what that chart of accounts should look like and how those accounting decisions are made. I don't know where that decision ended, but it does seem to me it's, particularly if this is going to go broader, and I love what Auditor Dougal is doing. I mean, he's gone further than I thought was possible. I told him that a year ago. I was very clear. I love what you're doing. I don't think you can do it, but I love what you're doing. But as this goes broader, the likelihood of people latching on to some ratio that looks weird but really isn't becomes more prominent, and we just need to make sure we're prepared to address those as they may come up. So,
Thank you, I appreciate it. This doesn't include capital outlay,
So
right?
let me touch on briefly. So one key area we noticed, okay, major capital expenditures. So let's suppose a school district is building a new high school. Okay, so for 2-3 years, you got a lot of cash going to that high school. It's probably inappropriate to show that in terms of having those students bear the cost of that expenditure for 2 or 3 years. Right. So we allow a toggle in there where you can show that cash spend, or you can look at the depreciated cost, saying, okay, we're going to appreciate that high school over 50 years,
Right.
and only show the depreciated cost, so you get a little more apples-to-apples comparison.
I remember that.
Yeah, so we allow it to look both ways. And then also to reiterate what Roy said, our key thing is we're not trying to say green good, red bad. We're trying to say, here's what your data shows, so the various stakeholders can then interpret their data with their expectations and their priorities to say, okay, here's what it means to us, and this is what we're trying to do, rather than us trying to dictate something.
Accountability.
And I just comment, if we do see something weird, that's why we have, 4 or 5 research analysts working on this project. We want to work with those people who are actually the stewards or generators of the data. We're not generating data, we're stitching it together. If it's weird for a particular reason, the system's flexible to make sense of that and then reflect it in the future. So we would take that kind of new information and integrate it into the system so that you don't have to remember that it's weird. We'll fix the weirdness in context.
No remembering weirdness, okay?
Now, Laura, one of your other things, we sent out the letter to the rest of the LEA saying we're going to start working with them, and one of the rural ones got back to us like same day, next day. We want to be early in that process, so.
So are they talking? Are other people talking and they're excited about it?
Well, this one wanted to come to us first. I mean, they really want to be early.
Don't tell me, but that superintendent, he must be sick or something. Or she. Just kidding. Todd, did you?
There are various ones that they want to better see where the data's going, so they recognize they've got these gaps, and they want to address the gaps, and they're trying.
Pretty excited. Okay, we'll take one more comment.
I also want to thank Park City for their help. They were part of the deep dive. So when we talk about trying to scale it for this deployment of trying to keep it down to just a few hours, Todd was not part of the few hours. He was part of the deep dive.
We were really deep. But just to reinforce the idea on anomalies. So Park City School District capture. That's an expense item that you don't see across the board. But when you go on to some of the ratios to see expenditures in instruction or teacher salaries or what, there's this thing that's just labeled miscellaneous because that's the account code for the miscellaneous expense that put everything out of
Todd Hobber's trip vacation.
And some people might very well think that. So those are the types of anomalies that may be so unique to a district, but at this point, there isn't a way to call it out and say, oh, this is that.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking time to present. Thank you for taking time to present to people in your own office. It was very helpful for me. And at some point, we'd like you to come again and maybe bring some of the new partners and get some of their take on it, or some of your old partners like Logan, and find out, not because of you, Todd, but maybe some of the others, and find out what are they doing with it? What have they done with it? I'd be interested to see what Ogden's doing with it, just because I'm highly interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura.
Oh, yes, Michelle.
Hey, thank you. I was just wondering, as we're studying this, if we have any questions, who's the best person to reach out to?
So reach out to Ann Nolay. And Laura, I think you can probably send that out to your committee.
I will.
Just Ann's contact.
I'll send it out.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. My voice from heaven. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. We're on to 4.2. We are not going to do 4.2 today. There's been some changes happening. So we're going to 4.3. I'm really happy to invite the State Charter School Board. Not the school board, but what do I call you, Jen? The office staff? I don't know what to call you. Come on up, the director, Jennifer, and her staff. They're going to give us a section review. And I'm actually really excited about this, so.
You are?
I am, because Jen's been just wanting to do this.
Is there a way that I can connect? Because it's just a blank screen at the moment.
Did you send that to us?
I was just gonna take you to our webpage because you went to see pictures.
Yeah.
I have pictures.
Well, I have pictures too.
I know that you have had some long days, so I don't want to take up your time saying what I want to say. I want to answer the questions and see what you would like to hear and what you would like to know from us. I do have pictures to introduce who we are.
Okay, well, we can wait on those. So just state who you are right now, both of you, and then do you want to do any presentation, or do you want us to just ask you things?
I'm open to either way. So I'm Jennifer Lambert. I am the Executive Director for the State Charter School Board.
And I'm Stuart Okobia. I'm the staff for the State Charter School Board.
And then, because I really do want to know kind of the layout. I think it helps our committee kind of know who's who in the world of finance.
I can turn around my computer and show you, but
We'll wait and see if Cammie can get it up. So what do you want to tell us first?
so the State Charter School Board is a 7-member board. They are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. I think somebody's
Slideshow. She disconnected.
As soon as she's out of the building, it should disconnect.
So let's see if she can watch on her computer.
Okay.
Just kidding. I'll see if they
Oh,
can
that'd be
do it.
hilarious.
Disconnect.
So it's a 7-member board, and we are their staff. We serve them. We are an authorizer. So what is an authorizer? An authorizer is someone who holds one side of the contract charter, and then the school holds the other side. And so charter schools exist because of a charter, and we are the ones that have been approved to issue those charters and oversee those charters. We are not the only authorizer in Utah. We are just the largest. And I can now start. Okay, so let me just very quickly. One minute. So we are the largest authorizer. We authorize about 92% of the charter schools in Utah.
Who are the other ones? Weber State?
So Weber State, you have the, I don't know what they're called now, DATC, and then you have some districts. So there is Granite District, Salt Lake District, Jordan District, Logan District, Iron District.
Oh, I'm so glad more districts. That is way exciting for me.
They tend to authorize maybe 1 or 2, so.
Yeah.
We're almost.
Are you on?
Almost. I love technology. Do you have any other questions while we're waiting?
I do. I don't know if Sean does already. So how is the relationship between the State Charter Board and the State Board of Education? How does that relate?
Well, so that's a broad question.
Well, just because you're the authorizer,
Right.
so you say yes or no to a charter? Or does the state board say yes or no?
So there was a law passed a couple of sessions ago where, and you have made rules, and we have submitted our process to you. It was quite a bit. We have quite an involved process, but within your board rules, we approve charter schools.
Wanted that out.
I now
Okay.
have the pretty pictures.
Okay.
This is the State Charter School Board. Kristen Ellenkowski is our current chair, and Delana Tonks is our current vice chair. Brian Bowles was one of the members that you nominated. You have two of the board members. The State Board of Education sends up nominations to the governor, and Brian Bowles was one of your nominations. Michelle Smith is also a board member, Cindy Phillips, Crystal Bassett, and Jim Moss is the other member that you nominated. So that is our board. Our staff, here's me. I am the
There's me, I love to look at it.
I am the executive director. Then we have James Madsen. He is our executive assistant. Amber Hellstrom, she is our data steward and IT developer. We have an application that is called UCAP, Utah Charter Access Point, where we communicate with charter schools, and we just work with charter schools, and she is our developer on that. Then you have Stuart Akobia, who is also right here. He is our financial auditor and works with the finances. Then we have two main tasks that we have to do, or as an authorizer, that's what we do. So the authorizing and school support, that's kind of the on-ramping. So that is Rebecca Cisneros. She is the coordinator over that, and she also works with mentors and other entities that we contract with to help in doing trainings and mentoring schools. And then we have oversight. Michael Clark is the coordinator over that, and then we have Brett Campbell, who is also a specialist who works in that. Have other questions, or do you want me to just talk?
You talk.
Okay. There is a PowerPoint
Jennifer and I get along.
There is a PowerPoint that was uploaded to your to the board docs, and I'm just going to go to, I think, 4, and then I will turn the time over for questions. Just some things that we have accomplished, and this was pulled together a few months ago. So this is as of last year. We haven't calculated yet the data for this year because it hasn't quite ended yet. But we have authorized 130 charter schools serving all 41 districts. We don't have a charter school located in every district, but because of online and other, we have students coming from every district. Since 2006, we have received 174 new school applications, and we have approved 40% of those. So 60% were not approved. Since 2008, we have received 25 satellite applications, and that has a much higher approval rate, which you would expect, because these are the successful schools who are wanting to replicate or to open another school. We studied this a few months ago, and we have been improving our application process because that's a huge important part. Chair Belknap, I believe that's what you were getting to in terms of the relationship.
Yes.
And we have found that over time, our process is yielding higher student outcomes. So that is a definite win. Also, since 2010, we have seen 5 operating charter schools close, which is only 3.5%, which is actually a pretty low rate. A lot of our charter schools are very successful. Last year, we provided more than 90 trainings and mentorings. I guess you could say almost 100. It might sound a little more round, but training and mentoring opportunities to all charter schools. And then in past data points that we have collected, we've found that charter schools could not assure or say that they were meeting their charter agreements, and that has greatly improved. And we found with the last time that we asked this this time last year, 87% assured that they're meeting at least 70% of their goals. And these are mostly like academic goals, largely based around state end of level assessments.
Do you have any questions? Any members?
Pretty cut and dry for me.
For staff, they track progress and attendance, progress and growth through the system, but also finance. Is that your job, or is that their board responsibility? Track finance.
Not quite sure on the question. So we have what is called, and I'll go to our lovely little triangle. We have what's called a charter school accountability framework, and that has different areas in it. So we look at a charter's fidelity. So we look, are they doing what they said they would do? We're looking, are they meeting academic or school achievement? And so we look at, whether it be status or growth, we work with this school, and it's according to our contract with them on what we're looking at in there. We also look at governing board performance. So, if their governing board is effective. And then we also are looking at finance. But it is based on what the school is reporting. We aren't doing their business services for them.
Okay, I have more questions. Anybody else have any questions? Thanks to both of you for coming, and Jen, thanks for hanging us in there last night. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to get to know people and to kind of figure it out. Are you also 4.4, Jen, on charter school revolving loan? I guess you're not presenting.
But I don't know if you need us to present, but we are here.
Okay, so Scott, is it you or someone else? Thank you. Have the revolving loan memo in your backup. This is Bridge, Mountain, and Da Vinci and Wasatch, right?
Particular caveat on Wasatch.
Okay. All right, so I don't know that, did you want to make a presentation, or do you want to see if we have questions first?
I think it's more to see if you guys have questions about it. The documents have already been prepared. Oh, sorry, I'm Brett Baltazar, work in school finance.
She'll get you to say it.
I know.
Remember your last name again?
Baltazar.
Baltazar. I've taught school a long time, and I've never heard that before. Fantastic.
It's not a common name.
Okay, and so can you just give me Jamie or Brett, I don't know, just a quick 1-minute synopsis of what is the charter school revolving loan? What is it?
Jennifer might actually be better at the...
Jennifer from the cheap seats, let us know.
From the chair. So we always try to post in the background the rule. The rule is available for your review too.
I just wanted to quick,
right, I know.
What is it?
Just
Because
so the public knows,
districts don't
your
have
board rule is
that
posted in
charter
the
school revolving loan.
The districts have it available to
They
them.
have something different.
Yeah, they have a loan available to them. The charter school revolving loan was set up to assist them in various purposes, typically when they start. It can assist them when other things occur to help with building purposes. There's various things that I don't think there's too many restrictions on it, is there? That you can think of. Yeah, it's a low interest rate for them, basically to help them start paying for some of the registration costs, things like that, before they open their doors, to help them to get to that point.
Okay, and then I'm just curious as to why building construction, is it that, are they Why? I mean, do they not have money somewhere else? I guess they have to get the revolving loan to fix their buildings. Not me and my ignorance.
So, Jennifer, they have the application side of it, so they see a lot of why the requests are coming through.
So let me give you an example. There was
Jennifer
Lambert, Executive Director of the State Charter School Board. An example was a school there was like heavy rain or something, and so they had an emergency where they had to fix their roof. So yes, a school does have some cash, but that is a huge cash expense that they need. And so this gives them that loan so that they can make those improvements and do what they need to.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I want to go backwards a little bit to your previous presentation. There's a startup and implementation grant.
Correct.
How is that?
So there's a lot of costs that happen when they start up. The startup grant is funds that do not have to be paid back. It is a grant, and it is given based on enrollment to a school. So, and that's in statute. And we just recently increased how much a school could qualify for this last year because it hadn't been increased in 10 years, and cost of living has increased over that time. So the schools get that just by being, approved. They can qualify for that. The revolving loan is something that they have to apply for. And the revolving loan committee is actually a committee of this board. There are 3 voting members, and then I'm a non-voting member on that committee. And they review the applications, and so these schools have to be approved. Well, they're recommended by the committee, then they're approved by the State Charter School Board, and then they're approved by your board.
So where are the funds for this grant?
The startup grant or the revolving loan? The startup grant there is a $2.5 million ongoing appropriation from the legislature that is given to the State Charter School Board. 2.1 of that is for startup grants. 200,000 of that is for a mentoring program, and then another 2,000 of that is for administration and helping in the startup needs. Originally, and I would have to go back when it was appropriated, but there was a large amount that was appropriated, and it is a replenishing balance because it's being paid back in.
Any other questions, Sean? Okay, and then I do have one. Why if they do not receive their grant, they need less money than if they did receive their grant, they need Waldorf.
Be happy to answer that one.
I'm kind of confused. It would seem like if they didn't receive their grant, they'd need more money.
So this is something that they are doing to make their school more energy efficient. And they are looking for this energy efficient grant. I do not know it off the top of my head. I apologize. But if they receive that, then they are going to do these improvements to make them more energy efficient. And then they would want this loan to be able to help with their portion of it. However, if they do not get that grant, they aren't going to be doing those improvements, so they do not need that amount from the loan.
They still need it for some improvements. Okay, that's helpful. So, we're looking for a motion.
I motion to accept the charter school revolving loan applications review.
On these 4 schools?
The 4 schools.
Okay, with the caveat as well. Any discussion to that? Is that an okay motion, Tammy? Yeah.
So the motion should be to close. I mean, it's good. It's a good one. What you're doing though is recommending the board approve all of the loans with the condition related to Wasatch Waldorf.
Yeah.
So
But the committee's going to approve it and then send it to the
yes.
board.
So yes.
So it's an okay.
Right. And then you send it for approval.
Further
That word approval has to be in
For
there.
approval, okay. So move. Okay. Any comments, questions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
For the next one, 5, can you just allow
Balthazar.
Balthazar, yes, okay.
Balthazar.
Yes, just stay here. Okay, these are the undistributed
Distributed
revenues.
reserve in school board budget.
Okay, so do you want to do a quick overview? Are you doing it?
Well, what I'd like to do, Chair, is, before we start the in-depth discussion on this particular action, is to orient you to what staff are recommending the motion be. Finance Committee members will review the code. Scale developed by the Juicy staff, Finance Committee members will make a recommendation to the full board to renew or adopt the scale in accordance with the code, right? So now you get the presentation, right, about what's going on with this particular code, not going on. So I also need to provide some additional background that's come up between the time we set this agenda item on. I plan to meet with the Public Education Appropriations chairs after this meeting, and they're aware that I'll get into this, and Jamie will get into this, the code needs to change, and there's no doubt about it. But timing-wise, with the board meeting in August, we just want to make sure that the public and all the business administrators throughout all the LEAs know that that's the next step even from here. And before the board meets in August, right, is to also engage with the legislature. We're not trying to be, presumptive or anything like that, but there has to be a code change, and when that occurs, will be driven by the board. There's no doubt about that. But we need to get this in front of them.
So we still have to do our job, because we really haven't made the chart.
Right.
The
scale.
The scale, we haven't, well, we've made the scale, but we haven't talked about the distribution of that scale. So, okay,
So that's
all
what
right.
I'll talk about.
Do you want me to connect and?
Yeah, will you?
Okay. I can do that.
And just so you can scroll with your cell phone. Gonna run out of battery.
So really quickly, and this came up to us from one of the LEAs. They had a question about it, and so I started researching it a little bit more, what undistributed reserves was. And when I started looking at GASB, is what the districts use in reporting their financial statements to us, I found out that undistributed reserves was not used anywhere. It had been used in years past. In 2010, GASB had updated what they call GASB 54 to call undistributed reserves to now be called, now I have to look at it because it's something that the stabilization or economic stabilization, something in that terms, rather than undistributed reserves. Basically, it's a rainy day fund. So that, going into that, there's different ways that LEAs can use that funds, but they have to set in policy at their local level how those funds are going to be used. And in in the state codes in 53G 7304, it talks about undistributed reserves. GASB doesn't use those terms anymore. We feel that we should be updating those terms as
So that's what
well.
we're asking for.
There's a few
There's two
things.
parts.
So that's one thing.
Okay.
Okay.
The first thing is that
All
we
right.
ask that we update where we discuss undistributed reserves to be something along the lines of what GASB is using, the economic stabilization. The second one is maintenance and operation is used in that code as well. Maintenance and operation is no longer in use. It's general fund.
Okay.
That's another term that it needs to be updated. And also the discussion of the USB scale.
So 53G says that the state board will develop the scale. We're not sure where that's at or if it has been developed.
Okay.
So as we're reviewing things, the other things have come to light, and so we're trying to get a group together to come up and make a recommendation for that scale.
Are we working with BAs to do that? And
Yes,
Okay.
we've got an accounting practices work group.
I know you're in the middle of your, but
You're
the
fine.
scale, are we gonna try and be somewhere around quote unquote rainy day fund percentage maybe that the governor uses, or somewhere in between? It's just, it's arbitrary at this point.
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay.
It hasn't been set. GASB doesn't really specify what it is.
Okay.
That's why we'd like to get the group together to get feedback from
Okay, great.
stakeholders
Yes.
to figure out what it should be and then make a recommendation.
Okay, so, all right.
This just goes on to further to discuss what the actual code says, and that's what it.
That's what we're working on.
That's what we want to work on, is updating portions of the code.
Okay, so if we're looking at this clearly, we need to work on two pieces that we're talking about word changes or name changes, okay?
Correct. In statute,
Right?
yes.
In statute. And then the other one is to either get a more defined piece on the scale or to get the work group together and get the scale ready. So we're not really looking for statute change on the term scale, or we are?
No, we need the board, we need to make a recommendation to the board on what the scale is.
The scale is. Okay, so that's a board piece. And then what the fourth one here, discuss the resolution?
That would be what that scale.
Oh, that is the scale, okay.
Would
All
be
right, so
what the
there's really
scale
only
is.
three-
Yeah,
There's three
there's
things.
three. With the work
Okay,
group being a
so
piece.
in, Scott, just for clarity on this, are you wanting our help to know who should be on that committee or that work group? Or is that something you guys can do internally, or
So,
your team?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
Chair, so Jamie pointed out that it's the, or what is it called? Accounting
So there's already a
practices.
group.
UASBO has an accounting practices work group.
But does that include UASBO, does that include people in the charter setting as well?
Yes,
There's a few people.
there's a
yes.
few.
Okay, thank you.
people that are on it.
Okay,
So what staff are saying is let's leave it in that.
I like that.
Recommending, no, we don't say. we
Does
recommend.
anybody have problems with that here? Okay. All right, so I guess we're looking for some action here. Action, you got some action? Okay, make up some action
I'm
here.
full of action.
Okay, okay, how about a motion?
Thank you. How should we word this?
Okay. Members, okay, we're gonna review that. So number one, can we separate these two actions?
Yes.
I think we should have two actions. Something dealing with, going to the appropriations, no, it's not Education Committee.
Scott Jones, I'm phoning a friend.
Finance committee members recommend that the full board authorize staff to go forward to the legislature and meet in order to
Work on
adopt
53
changes.
or
What'd
statutory
you call them?
changes.
Prepare statutory
So
changes.
moved.
Okay. You got that one, Cammie? Because that would be the first one. Okay. Any questions or comments? Oh, sorry, I didn't get any. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, no opposed, she's not opposed. All right, and the second part of this is that the Finance Committee will make a recommendation to the full board to adopt the scale in accordance, that we will make a work group? Okay, he's phoning a friend again, just tell us.
Scott Jones.
Please.
Board authorized that as part of the process of the statutory, that staff come back to the board with appropriate scale or resulting code.
So moved.
Did that include that work group?
You guys, did you get that?
Well, yeah, they'll do that.
Okay, Sean, are you okay with that? Okay, all right, any questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, that was hard.
That was one heck of a motion.
That just felt like we were disheveled, but we actually weren't. We just were disheveled in our motion. So, okay, 4.6, early warning system status and determination, way ahead. So, Scott, are you doing this, or is Aaron?
Well, staff, yes, so a lot of Aaron's coming up. Just some background information on this, which is pretty much in the public content background.
Right.
Hopefully Finance Committee members have a chance to review. So the purpose of this, again, orienting Finance Committee members to the recommended action, that you'll be provided support from Aaron and his team here that will introduce the progress to date with the system, and then Finance Committee members make a recommendation to the full board on whether to expand the operations of the system based on what you received today, pending, development and questions as part of this presentation. So, Chair, I'd recommend you turn it over to for introduction.
Okay, introduce yourselves, please. And
Aaron Bruff, coordinator over data and statistics.
Ben Smith with Panorama Education.
Chad Carpenter, Assistant Superintendent, Ogden School District.
For having us here. Just give you quick information, 2017 legislature reviewed and approved the pilot's early warning system. As we went throughout the state and looked at what the different districts were doing, we found that Davis School District, Salt Lake School District, and Canyon School Districts already built some level of an early warning system or study behind the early warning system. A lot of very interested in the process behind this. Went out, we did the RFP, got some bids. The award was given to Panorama. We had multiple districts interested in it. We had School District, Jordan School District, Tooele, Weber, Ogden, and Box Elder. Ultimately, 3 districts were able to come through. Some focus behind this, Provo School District, Ogden School District, and Box Elder School District. As we negotiated and worked with the districts, they were interested that they were district-wide, so every school has this operation, so that all their teachers or counselors, depending on how it's been rolled out, it's been set up. What has happened now is, so we are at the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of this month, the funding is sunset. We worked with contract, this was I think 2 months ago, I don't remember the exact time, we worked with the contract negotiation, make sure the funds were available for the schools to continue using this software until the end of June 2020. Now I want to turn the time over to these wonderful gentlemen here. There are some presentations. Ben Smith again from Panorama explain the early warning system, how it looks. Video, we have a movie star with us now. Appreciate that, but I'll turn the time over to them if that's all right.
so, depending on how long is this move, all this?
We want to give you as much or as little as is beneficial to you. So we can share a demonstration of the platform, which shows the core functionality and how districts are using it. Of course, I have Chad here to share that in reality on the ground, and then a short 3-minute video of talking about it in Ogden, which includes principals, others. So it depends on how deep.
Actually, my committee may think differently, but I'd rather hear from the educators than see how the system works. I want to see both.
I do not want to see both.
Sean, you can think differently.
You can, Sean, feel free.
See the system.
Okay, then we're going to see both. There we go.
So, excuse, what I also want to add to this is, if you recall that we were audited, one of the audits was talking about how we need to move as a board from out of what pilot programs. So what you're doing today is, by any means, this isn't any part of like a procurement presentation or anything like that. That's not what this is. This is for you as the finance committee to make a recommendation to the board that ultimately may result in you're making this one of your funding priorities in the future. That's the process that we're taking on this. So, seeing the system now or not is fine, right? That's really what the intent of this is, though. The legislature is always asking, well, what was the result of the program or the process?
How many districts did this?
You took this pilot.
Provo, Ogden,
Buckseller.
And maximized our available funding.
Want to
All
make
right,
sure.
so if you do both presentations, give me my time frames.
The platform and
Okay, well then just knock on wood.
yeah, please jump in, move me along. Really quickly on just the how it works, and then I'll show it to you. So we're currently integrating into student information systems and other key data sources, like in a high privacy way with the school districts. So Aspire and Power School, and then additional things on the side, like Educator's Handbook. So on a daily basis, with permission structures from district, school, down to classroom, depending on how people want to set them up and how widely they want to give access. Educators can see daily updates from all of that data together in one place. And so it's taking that together and integrating it, giving an analysis of students that are on track or at risk in all of those categories or those categories together, and giving the opportunity to monitor that data and intervene with students.
May I interject here? Doesn't Power School already do something like that?
So our take on it would be that, number one, that it has a visual into grades and into other components, but it's not combining them in a way in which you can actually categorize students to see where they are. And it's not typically set up in a way that's really user-friendly for a teacher in a classroom to see daily what's happening. This also combines assessment data, and Panorama has a component we add of social-emotional learning data, which specifically looks like students' connectedness to school, whether they're competencies around areas like self-efficacy or self-management. So it is sort of the SIS data in a highly user-friendly way and beyond, I would say. So to look at the actual system, but of course we're going to look at not real data here. We can look first into an entire district, and what you'll see here is, and this will be updated on a daily basis, the collective outcomes on academics, attendance, behavior, social emotional learning. We could go into assessments as well, but I want to go into a school. This is across a whole district, and of course, again, this is fake data. If we looked at a school like Lincoln Middle School here, you see on any given day, we could choose our period, are we in what quarter are we in, is it year to date, and hover over any of these areas to see where are students in terms of their what we call on track for college and career readiness, in attendance based on percentage of days attending, dark green, on track for graduation in a light green, at risk in a yellow, and if they're in the red, they would be considered critical. We can look at these across all of these indicators, and then on the side see all of the various demographics to break it down to say how are students doing that are high school students, that are English language learners, et cetera. Particularly we can look at trends because it's being updated daily. So if we want to say, are there students in our school that are declining in attendance within the last 7 days? It'll pull up that group, and you can see here this theoretical school of 976 students has been broken down into just 28 students that are currently declining in their attendance. And for each one of these students, we can see where they are in all of the combined pieces, not just attendance. But if we took a student like Richard Douglas here, we can see that he's not just declining in attendance. You can see here he went from on track to graduation to at risk, but also has D's in his coursework and some behavior incidents. So then educators have the opportunity to drill down with as much or as little information shared as each district thinks they want to share across their users, to understand who is Richard, what are the details of his demographics, how is he doing across the year. This is an area where you see supports, where we can see, are we taking on specific interventions to make sure that Richard is doing well, or see what's happening with him. Each of his individual courses here, you can see grades for. See in this case, his iReady data. We have the opportunity to look at state data, any formative assessments happening. Each day that he is attending or not attending, missing classes, tardy for classes, to start to look at the question of the combination of academic outcomes and attendance, behavior incidents, and Panorama has this component around social emotional learning as well that we can bring in, optional part of our work.
Okay, so Chad, I have a question. Now what?
Well,
What are you gonna do with Richard?
right. So what it's allowed us to do in this is, one, capture it all in one space, and have more, some of the data that we've previously been used to is that reactive data. Some that's housed in here, like behavior incidents, but one aspect we really like is bringing that social emotional component. So what you see in here is a lot of student voice and teacher voice. There's perception surveys that are taken a few times a year. And on the reactive data, for example, these students that would have a lot of behavior incidents, or were throwing chairs, or were out of school a lot, suspended, we were dealing with them on very reactive measures. What some of this has allowed us to do is take more of a preventative approach. So on emotional regulation, student sense of belonging, we can see some of these quiet students who are not acting out, and take some preventative measures with them. This also allows us in our Tier 2 chat, our child assistant teams, we pull this up and we look at everything. This really gives us a complete profile of a student. We're not looking at these different parts separately in different settings. We pull this up. One of our teachers said it's completely transformed our child assistance team meetings, because we pull this up and we can see not only are they struggling academically, but behaviorally. We can see trends when they're moving up, moving down. So it's really
Takes
zero
them
to
under
zero.
their wing. They have eight classes. Which person takes that child under their wing?
Well, for us, a lot is done through that child assistance team. So that's pre-taught interventions, whether it's a 2x10, which is having, I'm sure you're familiar with those, check in, check out. So it could be any number of people. It could be the counselor. It could be our instructional coach if there's an academic component.
So it could be 2 or 3 adults rather than just one or none.
Right, and the nice thing is, and I don't know if you highlighted this, but there's support plans embedded on
Yeah, I
this.
saw that.
And so when a flag, for example, is hollow or not filled in, it's in progress. It allows us to identify a couple of support plans or interventions that we're going to try, come back, see if they work, see if there's progress. We can close those out, so close that loop. And if that doesn't work, we can try others.
Okay.
So it's for us, it's really transformational in looking at that complete profile, identifying trends, assigning interventions, which we really didn't have a good, clean way to document before. So we use Google Docs. Sometimes those get lost. This has allowed us to really document those interventions, and I think we're up to somewhere in the ballpark of 2,500 documented interventions this year alone. And we've just really rolled this out to principals, assistant principals, counselors, and interventionists. Our plan next year is to roll that out to all teachers.
Okay, so I have another question on top of that. And I actually don't expect a response, okay, but I want you to think about it. If you had to pay for this, I don't expect an answer. I want you to just think about that. Okay? Would it be worth it? I don't, I realize you can't make that arbitrary decision yourself, okay? So, anyway, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, because I think that would be inappropriate. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just
Sorry.
add that from a technical standpoint, your question about action and what do you actually do next. So you can see here in the actual platform, there's 3 things right at a student level. You could add a student to a group. So if you say we're having after school tutoring, lunch reading groups, or even monitoring like sports teams, you can create groups of students and look at those students over time. So how are these 10 students, whether they are part of the basketball team or the debate club doing in addition to everything else. You can share the platform with others. So if I'm a principal and I say, hey, I just saw something with a student, you can send them a message saying, make sure you check in on Ben. Some of the data is suggesting that there's something going on there. Please look into it. So you're actually collaborating through the platform. And the third, as we said before, in addition to a support plan, we've now added in, you can actually add an intervention as we show here. So you can say, whether it's a literacy or math intervention or a behavior attendance or SEL intervention, any of the above, and even assign it to someone to say, hey, we want to make sure that we follow up in the follow-up. So it's really action-based there.
So, if I can interject here too. So, another aspect that I really like is it can be a very teacher-specific tool, and it can also be kind of a heat map for the district. What I mean by that is on a teacher-specific tool, there's a playbook. It has some interventions and lesson plans where if a teacher's noticing one or two students struggling with a variety of topics, they can kind of pull that as a resource. Where on a district level, you know, we're technically what you'd consider an inner city district. So when we were thinking of school safety and where our students felt, if they were safe at school, if they felt like they were safe at school, versus sense of belonging, student sense of belonging, we thought we were doing pretty well with student sense of belonging if you were to ask us without any sort of data. Yeah, we welcome students, we love them, we're teaching them, but they probably don't feel safe. It was the complete opposite when we heard the student voice through the perceptions surveys. They actually feel really safe in our buildings, but we have some work to do in a student sense of belonging or that school connectedness. So much so that we've incorporated that in our strategic plan now, and moving towards increasing our student sense of belonging, where without some of this information, we might have been focusing on the wrong area. Another powerful aspect in terms of the student and teacher voice, so we survey students on emotional regulation through this. And it was interesting because the students, to a certain degree, rated themselves low in emotional regulation, meaning they're telling us, I don't really know how to regulate my emotions. I get angry and I don't know what to do with it. Teachers, on the other hand, rated them relatively high. And that opened up a lot of conversation with our teachers to be able to say, this is not a student just not wanting to do it. They're kind of telling us, I don't know how to do it. And so it really opened up the door to have those types of conversations, which was pretty powerful learning.
Thank you.
And I know this has been kind of the fast-forward version, but going back to your question about what this does that a student information system doesn't do, hopefully that highlight of thinking about how can we...
I've already seen the difference.
Okay, got it.
I've seen the difference.
So there's a lot more here. There's school attendance dashboards. As you said, there's a deep dive into student voice and interventions. There's district-wide heat maps for looking. I want to be brief and not take up too much of your time. Right now, we have all three of the districts that we're working with at scale. Every school in the district is using it. I think that really varies from a district like Ogden to Box Elder, where they're so disparate in terms of their geographic location that the ability to centralize, the ability to see all this data on a daily basis is also going to support the ability for the district to interact with the individual schools and see what's happening there. So we're really excited about that progress so far. So we could go, I don't know if you have questions now, if you want to see if the audio on this video works, and we can connect it there.
I think we might be okay. I don't know if you could send that to us. Do you, Sean? Do you have any questions right now?
There's actually a link to the video on the board docs as well.
Oh, that's what I thought. You have a question? Oh, you already saw it. Yeah, okay. So who is in this space?
It's a great question. So there, from a vendor standpoint, I would say loosely, Bright Bites is one that has been similar but does slightly different work. I think they've done a lot of, I don't want to categorize their work for them. And I think Illuminate Education's probably there. But I think for something that does this sort of comprehensive, what we think of as a whole child or sort of MTSS approach where you see all of that data in a single place, we've found it to be a pretty unique. So our work broadly, we work across 900 districts across the country, and we work in about 10 state agencies, but that varies from core work around student voice to this more comprehensive vision of how do we see all our students' data in a single place.
Any other questions? Does anybody in the audience have questions? Scott, you okay with this? I think we're probably gonna move forward. So I would be looking for a motion. Pardon? I'm reading it.
So that's your decision point. Based on what you received today, do you as a finance committee member, finance committee, want to make or a look at expanding this, which, and I'll ask this of the group, would probably entail a funding request, correct? That's
Okay,
why we do
so
this
then I've got to
process,
ask a
is
few
so-
more questions then.
Okay.
Okay, what is the cost?
So the cost, we've created in our first RFP that we responded to, created a scaled option where the first schools that participated were at $5,000 a school, but as more participated, it got down to $4,000 a school. So obviously we would work with the board or with competitive bidding structures as necessary. And
School or district?
per school.
Okay.
So that way districts could make the choice. We wanted to create a lot of autonomy for districts to use it in the way that was best for them and with the schools that were best for them. Ogden started out with some of their schools, expanded to all their schools, similar with the Provo. So we would probably continue to scale that so that the more schools that participated, there was an economy of scale cost that brought it below $4,000 a school.
So do they use this in the elementary setting as well?
And I think if you're interested in more of the perspective there, and I'm trying to give you the actual perspective, the early warning system research really relies on thinking about the full K-12 spectrum to notice when students are on track because it's an early and persistent indicator.
I think this is just such a fun name because it's kind of what it is. Except I want some big alarm to go off, you know? So I guess committee, we really need to talk about this and so Scott, tell me what kind of time constraint if we don't do something today?
Well, so we're in the process of, putting,
Our
continuation of
priorities, yeah.
programs, your prioritizations on too, so we're fine. If you feel like you want to further study this in the finance committee, then I recommend add it to July 16th meeting, at the very least. So if, the key is that we always, the mark on the wall is usually when, by law, we have to, it's typically the first.
October, yeah.
So if we walk this, right, you could really, bring this back to finance committee. I just request or ask that you provide some specificity on what.
On
you're
what
looking
else we
for
need.
today,
Yeah.
What else you need here today, right, for your August meeting or your July meeting, right? Which, I would recommend as one of your staff officers that you.
To do that.
That you do that on the July meeting, because then whatever recommendations you feel you want to make at that time does definitely
Ready
get
for
on the
August.
August meeting. Otherwise, okay, still okay though, if you bring it back to the August meeting, right, and you feel like you make a recommendation then, the board wouldn't really necessarily hear that till September, which is okay, because we're still doing.
I know, but still getting
But,
pretty
yeah,
bumpy road then.
So the more we can do, incrementally or systematically is better, right?
So about how much is this for a typical district? At 5,000 a school. Okay, $250,000 for Nebo. And I realize there's economy of scale, but we're just gonna.
Some comparisons to competitors that are out. So get some more feedback from districts that are currently using the system. Time to see how
Yes.
Given board member Newell or finance committee member Newell's request, I recommend to the chair that the staff bring back the data and information on cost comparisons as part of the agenda item for that purpose, which is data and information. And then we add another agenda item for the comparison of the LEA. That makes sense? Because what's implied here is that by no way or any kind of means is the board actually making any kind of commitment for additional procurement or anything like
Right,
that. We
right.
don't do that here.
We're just looking
right?
for information.
So the implication is that, you know, we would follow we have to have the information that we have here today, and then going forward on that. So for data information on cost comparisons, that should reside in the data and information request structure, right? That's on your agenda, right? Your agenda item. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And then, bringing back, creating another agenda item for more comparisons of schools. That's my
Chairman, did you get
recommendation.
that for a committee action? Anybody uncomfortable with that?
So moved.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Okay, do you have marching orders?
Yes. Well,
You can get us a few things.
so
Yeah.
can I just clarify with you? So the finance committee, you were directed that you bring back school comparisons, right?
Well, and I'm not sure it's
Is that-
comparisons, it's school data.
Data.
What
Okay.
happened, you know, at the start of this school year, what changed for Richard to the end of the year because we had that information early? What changed for that student? I think, you know, maybe some student changes. What happened because this student didn't feel like they belonged? And what interventions did you do and what changed to their graduation or the end of the school year? Is that?
How many captured during this period of time?
Yeah.
So that we can see the.
Sharon,
makes
if I
sense.
may, in the interest of a decision-making process by you and or your finance committee members, to you, how long will that take you to do that so that the chair and or members of the finance committee can make a decision on what date
July
to
or
put-
August.
Yeah, on July and August. How much time do you need?
Beginning in July.
Based on the
16th.
guidance of Board Member Noel. There's one on the 16th and then there's the August.
But if you can't come, you could at least send your information.
I can't speak for the other districts. I think we could.
I just have to reach out to Minnesota School District and see what. So, Chad, you're thinking July is a possibility?
Keep in mind too, Chair, if I may, keep in mind, it's usually about a 10-day submission for what's called read-aheads or board backups before the 16th. Have to have all the information available for review by the finance committee, roughly July 6th.
For the context I can give from our standpoint, is that we're not a summative dashboard that gives outcome data per se, but we can look at the number of actions taken for students in there. We can
I
also
would think the school could probably give that rather than you. That already did give us how many interventions were already done. Sorry, I missed the term. Okay, are we good?
What sort of format would you like that in? I mean, if it was in a report.
Easy to read.
Like, do you want like some vignettes or really comprehensive? I'm just trying to.
Vignette's fine with me.
Like a little vignette? If that works the best.
I'm thinking maybe some teachers, some counselors, and then, you know, vignettes from them, but also students.
I think students would be very interesting to find out, really, did this really make a difference in their life?
A piece of probably relevant context is that because there were 3 phases of schools rolling into it, Box Elder, for example, rolled it out this spring. So Ogden, one of the reasons that we brought Chad here is because they have the most long-term data that we can look at. But we can also look at the voices from those other districts. I'm sure they'd be happy to contribute to talk about the effect it's having and how they're using it. They won't have the same longitudinal data set that Ogden has.
They both started this spring.
No, Provo started the beginning of this school year. Box Elder began in spring.
I think, and we don't need novels of it, just spit spots, and I love the idea of kids. Good?
Yep.
All right, excellent.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, thank you.
Time to gather. Because we're not gonna. Strings, I mean, it's like the Kirby vacuum. Cell. It's on. Exactly.
I know. Okay, sorry. Just doing a little prep work there. Okay, we're on to 4.7, our 277407. We're going to today look at the memo that's out and just see some of the updates and different things on the school fees and what's coming. We're probably just going to review this today and hold it and marinate on it before we move something forward. But let's see how it works. So, Tamara, are you presenting? You, Angie? Okay.
Shake and bake.
Maybe I'll get in.
Thank you. Just remember, you're going to hit your knees.
My knee? Selfish, Tammy. I'm just about to. I hope.
And we're hoping just to get some of this to digest right now and then maybe bring it back and more time with it.
Hey, would you like us to introduce ourselves and start?
Absolutely.
Okay, Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy.
And Tamara Daly, the school projects lead.
So, Tammy and Ian and I, and some of you may or may not know Ian, as well as Scott and others, have been receiving a lot of feedback from LEAs over the last couple months, really since session. Many issues have been identified. I know that Tammy and Ian have received specific calls, questions, seeking clarification for the rule. And in addition, as HB 250 passed through the legislature, there were some changes that were made that necessitate one change in our rule, which is pretty simple. It's changing the date by which textbooks shall be free from 2021 to 22-23. So you'll see that that change has been made in draft 2 of the rule. And while we were bringing the rule back to you for your review, we also thought it would be helpful, and I know we promised LEAs that we would do this. We would bring issues to your attention that they've asked for clarification on, and then give you all an opportunity with hope. We've tried to identify some options under each issue of what we could do in the rule to change or clarify those issues, or to just what the impact would be if you just kept the language as is. So draft 2 has some of those options already codified in there. Other issues, we haven't done anything in the rule but have highlighted it, but they're pretty easy changes. So if you'd like, we could go through the memo. We can go through the 10 issues, give you a little bit of background and what some of the options would be. Is that what you'd like us to do today?
Maybe I think maybe go through the memo. I think that's probably a good idea.
Okay.
What do you think? So.
I do. And we'll try to keep it short because a lot of that is self-explanatory, and you can read through it. Some of it may not be.
We're going to take a little more time on it too. So if you'll give us an overview, that'd be great.
And the number one issue, which is the number one issue in the memo, it's just the number one issue across the board. The question of what does textbooks mean? Because absolutely, it's going to have an economic impact for LEAs starting in 22-23. And you'll remember that even in our latest draft of 407 that we passed, we had a definition of instructional materials that we included in the rule. That did not get included by the legislature in the legislation. And so I think either way, we need instructional equipment and instructional supplies to be defined, because many of the questions LEAs are asking is this an instructional material or not? Or is this a textbook or not? Right. So we presented, you can see it's starting on lines, I think.
Should we stay in the memo or go to the draft?
Yeah, we can just stay in the memo,
Okay,
but
thank
for
you.
those who maybe want to look at the draft, it is line 60 where we've put those definitions. We amended the definition of instructional equipment. The key is whether or not textbooks should include everything, meaning instructional equipment, instructional supplies, and the cost for school equipment, or whether some of those should remain as you can charge a fee, they're just subject to fee waiver, which I think is obviously the LEA's preference, is for only what you would consider as traditional textbook or traditional instructional materials like a workbook to be free, absolutely free, and still allow LEAs to charge for instructional supplies and instructional equipment, like this year's for cosmetology, right? Or and you can see some examples here. So instructional equipment, one way you could do this is you could say that textbook does not include instructional equipment and instructional supplies, which means the LEAs would still be able to charge fees for those items, but they would be subject to fee waiver. So, or you could say, no, textbook does include those, and therefore it's free, you can't charge fees for those things. Probably the biggest items under instructional equipment that you'll hear as examples are band instruments. I mean, that's been a huge discussion. Things like sports equipment, bats, mitts, tennis rackets. You can see there cameras, stethoscopes, shears, for cosmetology. And many CTE programs, as well as schools who have band programs, have asked that they continue to be able to charge a fee or expect the student to rent the instrument and pay for the rental fee. And again, still, even if you say textbook does not include this, they would still be subject to fee waiver. So if a student could not provide their band instrument, they could not pay for the cost of the rental or pay for a mitt or tennis racket, the school would still be expected to support that student in either loaning them, a school-owned band instrument or school-owned mitt, or support the rental cost for that.
Okay, can you hold just one second? I just want to get a nod of head. Is the got two BAs? Is number 2 the one you're better?
It's more.
Or you can just say yes or no.
It's more clear.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So our goal was twofold, was to be very clear about what an piece of instructional equipment or instructional supply was, and that's why we provided all of those examples. And then to propose to you all to just be very clear about whether it's included as a textbook or not. Hands down, the feedback we've been receiving from LEAs is that they prefer option B. So
Still, these are all fee waiverable, so it isn't going to preclude a child who doesn't have the money.
From participating.
Okay.
There are some items in there that I think are problematic.
Okay.
Get items like paints, brushes, and things like that, that once they're used and they're consumed, they're not kept like a baseball mark. I think that those may need to be addressed under that.
you believe maybe they should be included as a textbook and absolutely free for everyone.
Yeah, because there's some of those things that I can see.
Right.
So how are we gonna define that?
That's gonna take time. I didn't want to say it because it takes time.
Because there's no way that we can list absolutely every supply that this one is waivable and this one is free.
You can say consumable items are considered.
And in some ways, that is what instructional supplies is meant to be. So one thing you could do is an option C, which would be to say that textbook does not include instructional equipment, but it does include instructional supplies. The impact of that would mean that LEAs would be required to not only cover 100% of the cost of what we would think of as a traditional textbook, but also to 100% cover the costs of supplies. So that is an option C that we could draft it that way very easily.
And then the other items, could get away
And right now, when you say larger items, do you mean the instructional equipment?
Instructional equipment, yeah.
Yes, instructional equipment, the net impact of what I would call option C, where we would say textbook does not include instructional equipment, but textbook does include instructional supplies, means that they could still charge fees for everything under instructional equipment, but it would be subject to fee waivers, so students who qualify, or even students who, for whatever economic problem they come before it, the school would be required. Okay.
Okay. Terry, you had your hand up? Terry, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay, I think he was before Royce, and so. I think Terry had his hand up first.
I would never serve.
Uh,
board member.
No, you did.
And then Royce, you can come up after. Do you care if you stand, Terry?
You can bring a chair over.
You can bring another chair if you
I'll
want.
bring another chair and people can use this, so.
Okay.
Actually, I'm Terry Shoemaker with the Utah School Board Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. Every piece of this conversation is critically important. So one of the things that you started off with was, we may not decide anything, but we might just listen today. There might be some wisdom to that, okay? 'Cause I think you're gonna hear potentially some different thoughts and ideas. And in the end, you're gonna have to decide policy decisions that are going to affect one group versus another group. The question is, how far do we go one way versus the other way? And what are the impacts one way for this group versus the impacts for another group?
That's what we need to discover.
That's what you got to discover, and that's why I want to reemphasize, I think there's some importance to that about not rushing. The notion of instructional equipment means a course-related tool or instrument that is required, and instructional supplies means a consumable or non-reusable supply that is necessary. It's interesting, because they're both, word necessary and the word required success, they're both required.
And there's consumable.
And one is consumable and the other is not. So that your question then, Board Member Newell, is possibly one group should be responsible to pay for that. But the wood for the wood shop, should the wood shop project include what? Chest?
The glue.
The glue. Okay? I mean, that's what's difficult. Both the glue and the wood are necessary.
Exactly.
If I'm providing computers for the students, and I've provided the computer, now do I also need to provide Wi-Fi access for them at home?
That is included in textbook right now.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm pointing out the difficulty of these things. So I think the hard part about this is that all of these decisions are going to have deep ramifications on what school districts charge, because they have to somehow calculate the fee. Part of the spending plan that they have to put together in creating the option of how we're going to go ahead and charge the fee in the first place. So these are really, 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 really important decisions. So I'm asking that you take time to ask questions with those who are here that represent entities like charter schools, like teachers, like school boards and superintendents as you go through this. That's really all I wanted to do at this particular point, so that we can at least help you with some of these things. Deputy Superintendent Stallings has done a magnificent job of putting together the issues, and we talked about them with superintendents. And she's going to share with you our preferred methods, and she's started going down that road. So when you hear the group said this, well, it's a representative group of superintendents and charter school people meeting together, and so that's what you're going to hear from us about these things. I think it's important for you to know that.
Does that include BAs as well, or just superintendents?
In this case, the BAs weren't part of that conversation, but the BAs are part of our group, and I would say to the BAs in attendance here, I think generally speaking, this is how our superintendents feel, and the BAs would probably be coming along with that anyway.
Okay. All right, thank you. Royce, do you have something else? Sorry, Angie, right in the middle of your presentation.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. And again, just because nuance here matters so much, I think it's important to note that if we try and simply say consumable versus non-consumable is a dividing line, we have to think about the concept of student supplies, which are typically also consumable and not, and there is an expectation that folks have to provide those on their own. Now, there isn't a perfect analog here, but I just think we have to be careful. If you are somebody who's taking that painting class, for example, you look at the definition of student supplies, it's not hard to see how the people in that painting class would also probably be regarding these things in the same way that they might regard student supplies. You know, the definition talks about them being commonly used outside of this, outside of that class. Well, most of the students that are in that painting class could well fit in that. And so I just want to point out that consumable, while it makes some intuitive sense, may cut across some other ways that we don't necessarily intend. And again, just to think through that.
Well, the paintbrush is non-consumable and the paint is.
Depends on, I mean, over time, certainly it,
Right, but,
yes,
you
so.
know, it's a.
Yeah, these are
the canvas
difficult.
For sure is consumable.
There's so many examples. That's why I think it's gonna take some time to do this. Yeah, what qualifies in what categories?
Chair and Board Member Newell, I'm redoing the memo as we speak, so I added your option C on the memo, and we can update or reapply or send out this memo.
Finalize
And
it.
if there are additional options that we didn't post, we'd be happy to update them so that people then can provide the board with feedback.
And I would think public could even send stuff, and it might incorporate and it might not.
Right, and this is these options are very easy to draft, because all I have to do in the definition of textbook is say, does include this and does not include that, and it's a very simple fix,
Well,
language-wise.
The language is until you start listing what it is. Then you're gonna forget something for sure. Todd?
On equipment, a lot of our CTE courses, they'll buy equipment. They actually get a kit that they'll, theirs when they leave, or if the district bought it, does it stay with the class?
CTE, when I thought about calibration tools for folks in the machining, you have stethoscopes, those type of things would fall subject to waivers if they qualify. But there would be like a Band-Aid that they'd have.
Got it on a waiver.
That's the hard part.
It's tricky. Anyway, it's another nuance on equipment.
See, we could also say if you, something like that, if you have a waiver, that's, doesn't.
The borrowed.
To the next person that qualifies for a waiver, so we can add all sorts of.
However, on that, so everyone else has a new box, but the waiver kids have an old box.
Yeah, man. You take what you get. No, I'm kidding.
I love that.
Down that road. There's some validity to that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a certain responsibility if you receive a piece of equipment based on waiver. There's so many variables that can go into this, depending on what we're talking about. And that's the hard part, is delving into each and every single
Right, but
item.
Angie, before you go into this, I think it's really important that we could come up with a definition rather than have it perpetrated upon us, if that makes any sense. I didn't say by where. I didn't say by where.
So two things. Right now, the definition says typically becomes the property of the student upon exiting the activity, course, or program. And we have not in this rule explicitly stated that if a fee waiver student receives instructional equipment from an LEA, whether they have absolute ownership to that afterward or not, and it might be case specific. That's really up to the LEA to decide, because you could see where the band instrument, you probably would never say, oh, now you get that band instrument. The CTE course ones, I think are a little difficult, because in some ways, the expectation is you get this certificate and then you can go into the workforce and practice. And if now you take those instruments back, you essentially take the student's ability to use those instruments in their profession. And I guess there's this principle of equity, is the idea that we're trying to get this student prepared to be able to go outside of the school and be successful in that CTE career. And if we take those tools from them, we've essentially given them the course knowledge, but not the tools. So I think LEAs will be the ones who will make those decisions, Todd, and you'll have to decide. We did not say explicitly whether you would have to let them have those tools afterward or not.
Maybe let the districts decide.
And that's what makes this all so much fun.
Yeah.
There is that sense of equity. It's difficult.
Or accessibility.
Yeah, accessibility, because there are students that they need that kickstart.
Right.
Okay, Ange, you're on.
Just last thing and Todd and others, we could say yes or no, whether it's their equipment or not afterward, if the board wanted to. But right now, it's vague enough that that type of decision is left to the LEA, at the LEA level. So the last thing I wanted to mention on this topic is pretty much no matter what we do on this issue, we will need to ask the legislature to amend the definition, which I don't think is a problem. I think they'll be very sympathetic and great to work with.
It'd be nice if we were ready, if we were in the
Exactly,
forefront.
yeah. So would you, are there any more comments on issue 1?
We haven't even finished yet. Did you do number 4 already?
No, I'm just on issue 2. Right? I mean, what do you mean number 4? Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'll try and do these really quickly. Another one, this one issue is also probably the next biggest besides instructional
Yeah,
equipment.
there's a lot lined up to.
And when we talk, we only address supplemental kindergarten here, but a lot of the questions are related to after-school programs and other activities that at times are provided by third-party providers and at times not. With supplemental kindergarten, at least as far as we've come to know supplemental kindergarten, we're unaware of any third parties who provide supplemental kindergarten for LEAs. It's usually the LEA is providing the supplemental kindergarten program. It's a school-sponsored activity. Unlike after-school programs, which could be a school-sponsored activity, or it could be that YMCA is simply having access to the school, and the YMCA is facilitating all of it. The payments are going to YMCA, et cetera. So it's hard to take a stance on after-school programs. I'm just footnoting that for you because after-school programs are difficult, and I think they're very fact-dependent on whether they're subject to fee waivers or not. That's really up to the LEA and how they structure those relationships and those programs. Supplemental kindergarten, we felt like is pretty clearly a school-sponsored activity outside of the regular school day, which means because it's in elementary, normally kindergarten or any elementary program, you may not charge fees if it's during the school day. And so what we felt was important to decide is to clarify that it's outside the school day, which means they can charge a fee for supplemental kindergarten, but that it's subject to fee waiver because it is a school-sponsored activity. They're school employees, they're being paid on contract, it's, they're integrated, bus schedules are altered for them, unlike an after-school program where the employee, they may or may not be school employees, likely there's no district transportation being provided, et cetera. So
just for clarity
there you
though,
go.
the supplemental is only for those who aren't receiving the funding for the supplemental.
Good, yes, we should clarify that because you're right. If they're receiving grant money from the state, and that's probably something we should put in the supplemental kindergarten rule that says if you receive
Then they're receiving full funding.
It's like the after-school program, actually, the intergenerational after-school program, we put in that rule. Well, actually,
Oh, I guess it wouldn't, I guess the term is wrong. It's not really supplemental, it's a full-day kindergarten.
some of them are doing full-day kindergarten, and some of them do receive state money for it, and some don't. I guess,
But if they do, they can't say that this is a supplemental and charge a fee if they're getting full funding. I mean, that's just something.
Actually, I think they could, actually.
right, that's what we're saying with the after-school programs. When we're giving the LEAs grants for after-school programs, we're still saying they can charge fees, they're just subject to fee waiver.
But if you have a kindergartner in this school here, it's a full-day kindergarten. That they can't charge for the second half because they supply full-day kindergarten. That's what their program is. That's what their school is. It would be my question. If this school over here does half-day.
Something we should look into, because some districts and charters probably just provide full-day kindergarten. They've just decided to fund it on their own. They don't charge fees for it, et cetera. But I think what you're talking about are the programs where they do call it supplemental or extended day. And I don't know how many of those that are receiving grants from the state are still also charging fees. So that would be something interesting to find out. I think we were thinking more about the supplemental kindergarten programs where districts are currently charging fees. And I don't know if they're receiving other state money for that or not. So that's a great question for us to look at.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going, or did you want any feedback from the?
Yeah, Carol.
Whatever you do, well, should I come up there?
Yeah, come up and sit down, Miss Carol.
Carol Lear, board member. I think whatever you do, you've got to define it, Angie, because there are so many variations on, to just say supplemental kindergarten doesn't begin to even touch it. There are so many variations on it, and you've got to talk about. The second thing that I think you ought to explore with the assistant AGs, I cannot see, and I don't like this, it breaks the bank, but I cannot see how it's not unconstitutional to have a program that is admittedly integrated, part of the elementary school program, and we're going to charge fee. And it happens during arguably what's the regular school day, because now we have extended day kindergarten. How is it not unconstitutional?
I think I don't know if that was a question for me or.
No, it's more rhetorical.
You're right.
She threw it out in the world.
I think we could maybe ask our AAGs to research that. All I would say is, I think you make a very good argument, and there's another argument on the other side that just says, because the state officially only funds and expects a half-day kindergarten, that we are testing the waters, right? We're trying to say that we have the authority to somehow define what is outside of the school day. And if I were advising a district or a charter that wanted to charge fees for supplemental kindergarten, and maybe I'm less risk adverse, and I'm more of a risk taker, I might say, sure, let's go ahead and try and charge fees, but let's make them subject to fee waiver. You might get challenged on that. I think that's your point.
And my point is, I want to do the right thing. I don't want to not be challenged. I'm a great risk taker by most people's accounts. So but I don't like doing things that are not, that I can see are unconstitutional, just because I don't think people have the wherewithal to sue. And so I would like to explore that, because there are ways it can be done. And again, I'm so sympathetic. I think we should have kindergarten. I think we should have all-day kindergarten. But the point is, when you say the state only funds half-day kindergarten, it doesn't anymore. It gives funds for extended day kindergarten. So arguably, it has become part of the elementary school program. So I just think we need to, I'm not going to beat up everybody today. I have such mixed feelings about it myself, but I just think we need a definition. I think we ought to explore the constitutionality of it.
Brian wrote that down.
And then have that be something that everybody follows the same rules. Because right now, it's some of what you say and some of what I say. Well, let's just see how long we can get away with it. Well, it's not the right thing to do.
And Chair, just last thing I would say, in order, probably, I think, what Board Member Lear is saying is if you are receiving funds for supplemental kindergarten, which all of our LEAs don't, but if you are, probably what you stated, that I think would go in line with what Board Member Lear stated. If you're getting supplemental funding, you are essentially getting funding for the whole day, so you shouldn't be charging fees. And so that's where we could define supplemental kindergarten as supplemental kindergarten that's conducted outside of the regular school day and where the LEA has not receiving funds under that other program. So, yeah, I think that's a good recommendation.
We can go on to, even though you haven't done B, I think we've got the idea what B would be. We can go on to 3.
3, we've just had a number of LEAs ask if they could amend their fee schedules after April 1. As you remember, the rule explicitly requires LEAs to now have their fee schedules adopted and approved by their local boards, their charter or school district boards, by April 1. And so the question is to explicitly allow them to do that, and you can see the language on, I think it's about 308 to 310, that says they can do that as long as they go through the same process, meaning they have 2 public comment period opportunities, they notice the fact that they're going to be republishing their fee schedules, et cetera.
Why is A your preferred staff recommendation?
You know, the reason we felt like it was just then up to local control to determine when the fee schedules could be approved, and let me tell you why.
The program, I was trying to find the difference. So B is if the program hasn't been, oh yeah, I like A too.
Yeah, because we, at first, we were thinking option B, but then especially for year-round programs where maybe something comes up in December, January, or February as an opportunity, we wouldn't want them to now essentially not be able to do that.
Anytime something changes, you know, I like.
But the LEA, and we had this conversation with the district and charter representatives this week, that doesn't mean an LEA couldn't choose C themselves, where they essentially say, we're gonna have our dinner, or B themselves. But here at the board level, A gives the most local control and them to set, you know, alternatives or exceptions. Anyway, so that was, okay. 4, whether LEA should have the authority to establish a reasonable maximum number of activities, courses, or programs covered under the annual aggregate maximum amount per student. Okay, now what I'm trying to say by this, hopefully that wasn't a huge mouthful. As a reminder, the permanent injunction asked the State Board of Education to establish an annual maximum per student, and we decided to defer that to our LEAs to make it more meaningful, so that each district and charter might have a different, you know, in one district or charter it might be 2,000 or 2,500, and that's all that, if you pay that, those activities should be covered. Another might have 7. We've had a lot of requests from LEAs that say, what if we have a very overactive and involved student that now is like 9 or 10 activities, including 5 trips, and we're maybe only charging $3,000, but they're amassing essentially $15,000 to $20,000 worth of debt for the district. So many have asked us, can we set a limit on the number of activities, courses, or programs? And usually it's trips. Like it's the cost of like the trip to San Diego or wherever that they're concerned about. And so we threw this out as an option. Right now it's silent, and you could argue that they could do that anyway. We're not prohibiting them from it, but I think some LEAs feel a little uncomfortable in that space. And I also think that based on my overall impression of the permanent injunction and the task force was that it be a true out-of-pocket maximum, and then families wouldn't be paying anything over and beyond that, which is essentially option B. So this is not, we don't have a staff recommendation. This is a tough one, and even our LEA, our district superintendents and charter reps, said it's a hard one. So
it is a hard one, because then I'm not even gonna go there. It's just a hard one.
It's difficult because you could set a threshold.
But then those families who really want to do it.
After they've reached that threshold.
And we didn't set a number. Because have no idea what reasonable is, and as we talked about with the group we talked through this with, it could be that it's unlimited activities, but it's not unlimited trips. You know, like maybe that's where the reasonableness is that you're limited to 1 or 2 trips, but you can engage or be involved in any activity.
There's a way to put this at the LEA level,
Yeah.
but allow them to say, at this amount, programs or trips, and you're responsible past that.
And A would give them the cover if they were ever audited, and let's say they did put a maximum on there, putting some language in there, allowing them to do that gives them cover. B, it just doesn't address it either way. It doesn't prohibit it, but it authorize it either. So.
Okay. Todd.
Our school district, we have a number of very exceptional in everything.
Just in your school district?
I can only speak for my school district right now. And so we were contemplating a tiered max. So if you're involved in 2 activities, and it tiers up so that a family who wants to engage their students in that many activities at least knows what their max will be. I think that was part of the intent, is you kind of know what you're in for. So
Have you discussed that with other BAs that maybe have the same issue?
I haven't yet.
Okay.
We're just trying to figure it out in our world, because we have students that engage in multiple activities. And so anyway,
Do you even have a way to tier the one that does 10 things?
we would step it up until we got to what was reasonable. And again, I think that's the intent, so that the family knows what they're in for, and that there is a reasonable. I don't know if that fits under B. That if you thought so, then I like B. But if
Well, A absolutely would cover you to do that.
Absolutely.
A feels like there's and.
No, that's just because it's drafted in the singular, but it would still allow you your reasonable amount of activities. I would say what you're wanting to do absolutely fits in A. B, I think you could try, we haven't given you express authority to do it, but we haven't prohibited you
Yeah,
from
we were
doing
planning
it.
to go forward and
Yeah.
in high risk find out.
Of course, they're one of those high-risk ones. You and Carol are high-risk. But Todd, I have another question for you. This tiering, so if you tier and you have a student who waives all the way up to 10 things, you're also ready to pay that
We
difference?
would have to anyway, we would anticipate that anyway.
Well, you wouldn't if you said after this max, you are in charge to pay.
I think in our community, the cutting someone off and saying you will not have educational opportunity after this point will be.
In your area.
I'm just talking for Park City right now. That's why a tiered concept is being thought about as, hey, if you want to go there, here's how it works, and if you don't want to go there, don't worry about it.
Okay.
May I clarify something, and maybe Todd, you want to hang out in case you have a comment or a response or whatever. One thing I just wanted to note, that this maximum does not apply to fee waiver students. Like fee waiver students are fee waived.
Yeah.
So if you had they're already waived. So I want you stated. Yes,
okay, that's
is,
what makes sense.
Let's say that you have a tier and it goes up to 8, and that's the max. You're right, if they wanted to do the 9th and the 10th activity, at that point, they would then have to pay that out of pocket. But again, fee waiver students would never pay it, so.
Yeah, so we didn't contemplate fee waivers.
Okay, all right, well, that makes much more sense, so.
Okay, would you like me to go to the next issue?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We're almost halfway. They get easier.
Halfway?
They get easier.
Geez, maybe we'll go to midnight or something.
That ain't gonna happen for me.
Whether an LEA can require students to pay fees prior to the student participating in activity class or program that is provided by the school outside of the school day. So right now, this is, again, a lot of these issues are related to trips. The way the language states right now, it just says, and I almost need to look at the language, it's 457. It essentially says that you can't exclude a student for failure to pay from the activity class or program. But the concern is for your trips, if you don't have an incentive for them to pay that trip before they go, that you may never recover that, and then you have to go into collection, et cetera. So adding simply during the school day means that they can't be excluded from anything during the school day, but for something like a trip, they could be excluded until they pay. Or, and this is not fee waiver students, again, these are people who are required to pay.
Not fee waivers.
Yes, so it's
they're excluded until they pay.
until they pay, so meaning you can't go on the choir tour until you've paid for the choir tour, you know?
A fee waiver student is already paid.
Correct, they're already covered, they don't have to pay. So you
that's a
see,
good
all
catch.
we're adding is during the regular school day, so that for those things outside of the school day.
That's a good catch.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was good too. Not that I came up with it, Doug came up with, anyway. Yes.
No, I thought it was great.
Yeah. Okay, number 6. I hate to take credit for, I don't always come up with the solutions. We just come up with the problems. Okay, number 6, whether the language prohibiting LEAs from requiring students to perform community service in lieu of a fee should be eliminated. So there's nothing in the rule right now, but, and I would like somebody maybe from LEAs to give this perspective, to explain why requiring community service potentially in lieu of fees is a good thing. Because you remember the task force and the board, we eliminated that, and all we said was a student may perform community service voluntarily to offset fee waivers or to offset the cost of the fee they're supposed to charge, even if they're a student who's required to pay fees, but no more required community service. You'll remember that the permanent injunction did allow LEAs to require community service in lieu of fees, but the board and the task force, their option was no. So we were asked to bring this issue forward. It is something, all we would need to do is delete 2 lines, and then it would be up to the LEAs to decide if it's required or not.
Can you define community service for me?
Well, that's a trickier one.
Blackboard
In
erasers.
statute, we are supposed to
Are there
provide.
any erasers anymore? Don't you remember doing that when you were a kid? Terry, come on.
Yeah.
Don't you remember and get all over you and go home with chalk everywhere?
I never got in trouble and had to stay after school and do that.
Oh, well, I did. I know it surprises you.
Terry Shoemaker with the Utah School Boards Association and the Superintendent's Association. This issue is important to school boards and superintendents, particularly in our smaller school districts, as well as our large ones too, but particularly in our smaller school districts, because the issues here are really, do we want to teach kids and families that there should not be any obligation to try and do something to help with this or not? That ends up being this. The injunction allows for it, right? So the question is, can school districts learn to do it well such that we don't identify the kids, we don't create problems with their families because they're performing community service? That's going to be a local issue for them to deal with, but they would like to tackle the problem.
Would they like to let anyone have the opportunity to work off their money? Not just be waivered?
Well, I think some do, yes. But we're talking specifically about this. That question's an important question, and my guess is some do. They probably, the reason that almost all activities also have technically a group fundraiser with them is to allow them to help pay towards the experience. That seems to be the right thing to do. You ought to participate in helping pay for what's going to benefit you. That just seems to be a moral obligation. School districts would like to be able to have that opportunity to help those kids in particular do this right without isolating them so that it becomes problematic for them to want to be part of it.
Sean?
I don't see any issue with the groups. Individual basis, there's some connotations there. Kids in these demographics where they're doing the same things that the kids in our system are doing. How do you delineate that? How do you make sure that they're not getting those same feelings by forcing them to do service may be an issue. I think the group fundraising and having some responsibility to be there and participate, because some will benefit from the funds and not participate at all. I think that's where you do have some leeway. It's a difficult issue.
You're right, Sean, and I don't have a great answer for that. But the only thing I'm telling this group here, you, policymakers, is that the school boards, there are several school board and superintendents who are interested in trying to pursue this. Hence, you received those requests to put this in as a conversation to have with you. I'm just reinforcing that that's what they're interested in because they feel like that's the right thing to do in their communities. And we need to do it right, which is your point, and you're saying it may be difficult to do that. We understand that, and certainly I will reinforce with them and have before, if they're going to go down this road, it has to be done very, very carefully.
Very careful.
Well, yeah, I have this, I feel like, so when you talk about community service, we're talking about students working within the school or working
in the community or
earning money, I mean, or donating time.
Donating time.
So where's the money coming from?
The money's still going to be coming from the school district.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I clarify something though?
Yeah.
The law, even in the permanent injunction, stated that you have to treat this, and it's subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that if you, if the student does a lot of work and then they have to move to either another school or another district, that the time, the amount of money that they would have earned while they did that could transfer with them. And you'll see there's a lot of language in there about all of the things you have to ensure when you're requiring students to essentially work. It's called community service, but
That's why I wanted to define it.
we've received a lot of hotline calls. I think this is before Tammy and Ian, because you probably got a call, some of them too, of parents and students calling and complaining of demeaning, in their mind, or their perception is demeaning required community service. And I think that that was part of the reason that you saw it come out. I'll just state that the other thing that was discussed is the fact that why are we only expecting low-income students to do community service when oftentimes the middle and the high income also need those opportunities, hence the group fundraising, right? But I think LEAs have just asked that they still have the authority and that they'll determine at their level how to manage that. Is that correct?
That's really it. With the cautions, I think Board Member Newell, and I'm certainly agreeing with him, have to be in place if they're going to go down that road.
It can become very problematic.
Yep.
I guess I just see this as a different way because I don't look at it as demeaning if I have to go out and do some community service to get something that's being provided for me. It's like, hey, I went and earned this because I don't see that as demeaning. I think it's like honorable. It's empowering. Hey, I went out there, busted my butt because I don't care what my rich neighbor does, like myself. I mean, yeah, I'm sure I would love to not have to do anything because I had rich parents.
But if it sets you apart, then it's then that's.
That sets me apart as a good worker that's going to pay my own way. That's the way I look
It
at
would
it.
be nice if we all looked at it.
Yes, it would be.
Really,
It
would be.
makes serious.
Because I look at it the same way you do. But
He'd send his kids out there to work even if he had the money.
Yeah.
I send my kids out there anyway. I do, but
Right.
it's- for some, it just doesn't work that way.
I understand, but then
Family circumstances don't allow it to happen in the way that you and I might do it.
They don't see it
And
the same way.
I do see that where the family circumstances may not allow that to happen. I just don't want, hey, I don't have to do anything.
Right. No problem.
And
Do you want to come up?
this is going to happen.
Thank
and
you.
then Angie, I think after this comment, we'll keep going. Because you have 3 more minutes.
I'm Doug Larson from Granite Schools and
Doug, what's your role function?
Director of Policy and Legal Services
Thank you,
at
Doug.
Granite. I think it's important actually to separate number 6 that you had up there and number 7 that you had up. For 6, I think most school districts actually don't require kids who are on faculty to do community service. That's not a practice that most districts are engaged in. I would agree. Where number 7 is a separate issue because requiring kids to participate in group fundraisers actually impacts not just kids who are on fee waivers, but it also impacts kids who, for whatever reason, their parents are wealthy, they've got money, what have you, they feel like they don't have a need to be involved in fundraising with their team or with their organization, that kind of stuff. And so the idea is that the requirement for group fundraising is part of teaching kids about the need to work as a team, to work together.
And I'm all about that, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a different issue though than number 6, right? Where we're talking about individual kids working off their individual fee waiver. Number 7 is about these group fundraisers, and that, I think you should maybe consider those things separately. Does that make sense? Because we started to kind of conflate those two questions. Yeah.
They were getting conjumbled.
Yeah. So the idea being that you can require kids to be in part of a group participation, or required to be part of a group fundraiser, because the way we're looking at it now in the districts, we used to basically say, you're going to pay this much, kids, and then we're going to fundraise all the rest.
Right.
We can't do that anymore. So now we're saying it's going to cost this much, and we're going to fundraise like crazy.
And I know this much.
To knock it, to knock it down. And to do that as a team or as a team effort, or a class effort or a group effort or a Madrigal's group effort or whatever, I think is a value that we want to teach kids.
I totally agree. I agree 100%.
Going on to this next one, Terry, stay here, because requiring, because, for example, and I'm not talking about any type of child, I'm talking about all children, may not be able to come on that Saturday morning. They're doing the garbage cleanup and getting paid for it, or they're doing their garage sale. They may have work. They may have to tend for their parents who are working. So what, if we require this, now what happens to this child?
So between option A and B, currently, B is essentially what our current language is, which says that we cannot, an LEA may not deny a student membership in or participation on a team or group or in an activity based on the student's non-participation in a fundraiser. My interpretation of what is currently on 510, it says may allowed for group fundraisers. I think that was always meant to be may allow for essentially required group fundraisers. But then you remember the next 2 lines softens that up and says, however, if the student has to work or whatever, you can't deny them.
But you don't know.
Right.
And I think that's a training, sorry, Doug Larson again, I think that's a training issue for LEAs. We've got to train our coaches and our teachers that they've got to give multiple opportunities for kids and that kind of thing.
I would think that most of them would understand that, hey, I understand what's going on here, but we'll find a way. Because I've been a varsity coach, I was for many years. I would go out of my way to absolutely, almost in any circumstance.
Well, it doesn't matter if they're come from a family of wealth or a family without wealth.
Because you want them there. You want them
They might not be able to
participating.
come there Saturday morning.
Right. And I'm like, I as a coach, I know these guys, the coaches I work with, every one of them are like, hey, there's circumstances that we'll handle it.
So Angie, I guess when you're thinking about this, that's what I don't want to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. Robbing from the rich to pay the poor, okay? I do want to rob Peter to pay Paul. But my point is, I want you to think about that. I have to do that at my house all the time. Never here. But I want you to think about that, because I think all of us would like kids to participate, earn, and grow in that.
Yes.
When they can't, what is the consequence or the reward or lack of reward for them? So can you think about that?
Should that decision be here, though?
I don't know.
I don't think it should
maybe
be.
Shouldn't,
I think
but
it should
our
be
words are going to be
district
important.
schools
Required
that make that
or
decision.
participation in. I think, because going back to Doug's comment, training is going to be critical.
I agree with you totally, but I don't want that decision made here. I want that decision made down
But it's
at that
already
level.
made.
And but actually, I would say that if you like that, option A seems like a good middle ground, because it does say require group fundraisers, but it still maintains the language that you may not prohibit a student from membership in the activity. It's still there. I think that the clarification and the reason for striking in or participation is this idea of, what if you have a wealthy kid who's like, I'm just going to pay, I'm not going to participate in the group fundraiser, and I still want to be on the first string of the football team or the volleyball team. The in or participation allows that coach to then say, I don't like your attitude, because you have money, you've decided you're not gonna participate with us, and so leadership wise, I'm not gonna
Maybe
make
they
you
just have
captain.
attitude and no money.
But so there was some question about that in our participation.
that
Do you
then.
see?
I see what that's saying now.
Yeah.
So, because I was thinking in participate, I was thinking, so we were thinking about taking out in or participation out.
Taking participation out so that they could limit participation by saying, you're still on the team, but you're not gonna be a starter anymore because I don't like your attitude, or, you know.
Which should be at the coach's discretion,
Right.
completely.
Like if they missed an activity, a practice, you would have the ability to do the same thing, right? If all of a
Right,
sudden.
if you stay home from school, you do not get to play in the game that night.
Yes, right.
I like that, just having the language there. I think most of the time we won't have to worry about this language has to be there for that one case. And
Yeah.
that's my question.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to go on to 8?
Yeah, I'll try and do the last ones really quickly. 8 is just pretty much technical. There were some questions about whether LEAs even have access to who qualifies for free and reduced lunch or not. A lot of people can self-report that they qualify for a free and reduced lunch, and they could be making $125,000 a year, but they self-report and nobody checks it or verifies it. And so this expectation that somehow they're linked together is not good. Especially because sometimes it's not even the district that verifies the income level for qualifications. So instead, what we changed the language to state that the superintendent would establish those income levels, which our staff plans to still use those income levels as the income levels, but we aren't necessarily tying it, like if Angie's kid qualifies for free and reduced lunch, it doesn't necessarily mean automatically that you qualify for fee waiver, because again, lots of kids qualify that have never had their income verified. That's it. So that was a recommendation we had from.
But there are already, are they federal guidelines that?
Yeah, that will follow.
There's published federal guidelines to follow.
Yeah, there's already guidelines established.
So it's just mostly a clarification.
It's
We'll-
the verification, that there is actually a verification before you get the fee waiver.
That eliminates our risk, doesn't it?
And then next, determining whether income verification for fee waiver eligibility should be done at the LEA or school level. We received some feedback actually from a legislator that was interested in potentially opening a bill file to require income verification be done at the district level, not at the school level. But there were some things that I was told about why you might want to keep it at the school level, because many students who qualify for fee waivers, their families aren't likely to ever make it to a district, number one, to get that fee verification. Number two, some families have a comfortable relationship with their principal, but they feel either awkward going to a kind of intimidating district. You know, they're not, it can.
Either one?
Well, right now it's either one if we do option B.
So why
Or no, I mean option A. If we do option A, which is the current rule, we're not mandating it. But I promised this legislator I'd bring this to you and talk through it in lieu of a bill file being open to require it.
So what was their hope out of this?
I'll tell you what happened. A principal of a school complained to the legislator and said they're overwhelmed and they don't want to do income verification at the school level.
Okay, so A gives either one, district
others
or
do.
school. A gives district or school.
Yeah, right, it's up to the LEA to determine whether it's done at school level or at the district level.
I like A.
Okay.
Okay. Sean?
Yeah. And what I will do is I will converse with the legislator and explain that as we talked about this, I found out some of these instances where families actually feel more comfortable talking to their school principal than going to a district office. So, and then the last one is just a notification, nothing you need to decide today. But we wanted to make you aware that there's a lot of feedback we've received on spend plans, financial accounting and reporting related to school fees, as well as some questions from us, from staff, on how LEAs are either required or not required to report student payments to third parties. So for example, if the LEA is now
paying, or somehow sending money to Summer Haze Music, for example, for or the student is paying Summer Haze Music, do you report that or not? So there are a couple of working groups, the school fees spend plan work group and the activity-based costing work group, they will be working on these issues. And that, we'll probably have to amend the rule.
Would that be similar, Angie, to like the choir uniform? If they're paying those people, or
You mean
because
they're like a third party, probably, right, Tammy?
Yeah, because the payment, spend plan requires them to include third-party payments. And there's just one line.
In
And
the
so-
statute.
In the statute. So third-party payments will need to be reported, and there's a.
It's gonna be a hard one. I guess if they own.
This is the example that's tough, though, is for instruments, for example. Some of your students may buy their instruments on Amazon, or they may go to Summer Haze Music, or how do you account or say, parents, let us know, how much did you pay for your violin? One might pay $300, another one pays $3,000. So that's the rub, right?
Yeah, and it's also in your rule on line 140, the third-party payments that provide part of school activity, class, or program is part of your, something of monetary value, is part of that definition. And I think it's important to capture that, and is it as simple as a survey? How will the LEAs capture that information and then revalidate it as we monitor it?
Yeah, that's right, it is in our rule
It is
also.
in the rule, and but that's, yeah.
So you're going to bring back some recommendations on that?
Let's work these,
Okay. Both of those work groups. Okay.
You get it from Amazon, oh well, you will next time.
Scott, do we need this back in July or in August?
It's up to you. We could do August, is fine, yeah.
You sure?
I
This
recommend
rule
August.
takes effect January 1, and it applies to the 2021 school year. If we could do a committee hearing in August and then get the board's review in either September, October.
So I have a question though. On a couple of these, we're pretty clear. It was a nod across the board here. We felt pretty comfortable with some of them.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I'm wondering if we couldn't add it to the end of July. It just, and even if
July
nothing's,
16th?
even really changed then, that we pull out those ones and at least get those done and ready to go into our, they can stay in our committee and not necessarily be presented in board meeting, but then we'll present them in September.
And you could also invite other board members who are interested in this rule to come. Yeah, so July 16th, isn't that when your meeting's gonna be?
Yeah, pretty soon. Now we're from 9 to 12. Pretty soon we'll be 9 to 7.
Okay.
AM, that was an AM.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And Ian, it's very nice to meet you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Ian Fitch on the school fees project and internal audit.
So welcome aboard, okay? Thank you. Thank you, Tammy. Tamra.
I answered to both.
Okay.
All right, I can.
Okay, we have a little bit of time to get done with these. Michelle, are you still on?
Yep, I'm on.
Okay, good. Scott's going to be on in a minute too, so we still have enough people. Thank you so much. Okay, number 48, Public Education Regional Service Center, draft number 1.
This one's quick and easy.
Oh, is this you, Angie?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Just, this rule's up for its 5-year review and continuation. We updated it technically just for the new drafting style, and pretty much that's it, to make these technical changes, because if we don't file the 5-year review and everything, the rule sunsets. Just a note, likely this rule will need to be amended or brought back to you for substantive changes later this year or early next year. So again, this is just technical updates. The rule still continues to be necessary.
Okay, so I need a motion. I think that might be you, Sean.
I move to accept draft R 227706, draft 1.
On first reading.
On first reading.
First reading. Review.
Send it to the full board on second and final reading.
Sent to the full board on second and final reading. faster.
You're
You
doing
don't
good.
need that time. As long as the three of us stay here, we're
Yeah.
good.
277706. Okay. Any discussion over there? Michelle? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Scott, are you an aye on this?
Aye.
Okay. Okay. Andrew, you this next one too?
Yes, I am the next
Okay.
one.
This is R 277479. It's a school construction oversight, inspections, training, and reporting.
So this one, we are actually simply requesting that you approve the continuation of it and not even amending it at this point. And that is because it's very lengthy, and if we start to go into even the technical amendments, we have to make some substantive changes. It's hard to explain, but sometimes you go from passive voice to active voice, you have to make decisions. So the staff recommendation is to simply continue it at this point, and then we plan to bring it back this fall or winter, because we have a new construction person, and we didn't want to overwhelm him since he's so new in making changes. But, so it's just a motion for continuation at this point.
Okay.
For the rule to be continued.
Okay, I accept the motion for the rule to be, rule R 277-417 to be continued.
On first reading.
First reading and addressed at another day.
And sent to the board.
Oh, we're sending it to the board?
Yeah.
Second and final reading, yeah.
Sent to the board for second and final reading.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Angie, I know you're not the next one because this one's Scott.
Both. It is Scott and I.
Okay.
And Chair, would you also invite Jamie up for this one?
No.
It has to do with ADM.
Okay, this one is 410, R 277927, the Teacher and Student Success Account. This is, there were some changes legislatively, which is going to make some requirements financially and more teachers are going to get this money. So,
I think it'd be beneficial if we put it in context, that Jamie puts it in context of why we're here now. What came up, why
Okay.
we brought this to you.
well, Jamie, you've just been asked to do that, so you're on.
Perfect. Jamie Barrett, School Finance Director. After we went and presented this rule to various groups, UASBO at our finance training, we had several questions come back. One of those was, what happens if the LEA does the allocation on prior year ADM for individual schools? What happens if during the time of prior year to current year, we have boundary changes? We have schools that have a very significant increase in growth for students. We have different grades offered with charter schools specifically, or if our board's going through and changing the feeder pattern for different schools because a new school has come on. Funding based on prior year ADM doesn't really represent what the current population is for those schools, so we could be over allocating or under allocating a TSSA allocation at the school level. What does the board propose we do about those circumstances? Because the board rule technically didn't address those.
Statute didn't either.
Yeah,
It's really
statute didn't.
statute that should have,
Yeah, 'cause
because
it drives-
yeah,
yeah.
but now
So-
board rule is addressing it.
Correct. So that is why we're here today.
Okay, but I think for clarity, maybe it would be helpful, what is TSSA?
Oh, sorry. Teacher and Student Success Accountants, Senate Bill 149 from this last session.
Okay, sorry.
Give me the list of acronyms.
Yes, I did.
Sorry.
Right.
Okay, so if you can see lines 134 through 140 is putting clarifying language in that after calculating an LEA school level allocation based on prior year ADM, that they can make some adjustments due to various reasons, those including changes in school boundaries, changes in feeder pattern if they have a new school come on, grade levels offered, or significant student growth of 30% or more. Still basing the initial allocation on prior year ADM, and then they could do an adjustment column based on these specific.
Okay, so they're reaching out to go get those funds. Okay, they do it at the end of the year, right?
Once an LEA has their framework approved by this body here, funding is on a 1/12.
Okay, all right.
And this language, if I might, sorry, is specifically controlling how an LEA distributes or allocates money to their schools. The language was very specific in statute and it required to be on prior year ADM. And the statute, when they drafted the statute, they didn't take into consideration some of these instances. And so we're essentially giving districts and charters cover because they don't want to send 40 more thousand to this elementary because those 400 students moved over to this one.
Because they went to this new school over here.
So we're supporting them by making it clear, yes, even though the statute says you've got to do it here, we're now giving you some additional authority to make some adjustments to that. I think that the statute, if this had come up during the legislative session, my guess is the sponsor would have included this language in the statute, but they just didn't think.
Here, then it's still
Yeah,
covered.
So we're supporting them, yeah.
Terry, do you have a question, comment? Is it a question, comment, or a comment, question? Yes.
Terry Shoemaker with the School Board Association and Superintendent's Association. What 134 to 140 does, this adjustment does, as I understand it, is it allows for school districts that have some exceptional issues to appropriately make adjustments to the TSSA funds. It makes sense to us. We would hope that you would support this change.
Okay, thank you. Royce, do you feel the same? Good, okay. Do you have any questions? Michelle, do you have any questions?
No question.
That it?
That's it.
Well, I'll entertain a motion. Are we on draft 6?
Yes.
Waiting on her to do it.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just saying the motions right there.
That's my turn? No, my chair doesn't make motions.
Finance Committee approve.
I make a motion to approve.
Draft 6 on first reading, and if approved by the committee, for recommendation for approval to the board on second and final reading.
Well, his motion is to approve it, okay. Any questions? No? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all right. And then we're on 411, we don't have any discussion on that. Do we have anything on 412? Anybody requesting any data or information? None? And then 413, do we have any recognitions?
Just the recognition of the progress of our accounting staff as far as year-end close goes. Heavy lift during the month of June, on board, thank goodness, and
On consent calendar.
I don't, yes, we do. Okay, so, Sean, are you okay if we put the Regional Service Center on consent, the construction oversight one, those two?
Yes.
I don't think anything else can go on consent, Cammy. Because I think the TSSA, I think we need to review that, just in case, you know? Okay? All right. We are.
one
No,
other
not adjourned.
progress, teachers' supplies and materials work group, invitations went out for that, or have they gone out, the invitations gone out for it, or?
To see what dates will work,
Okay,
so.
So we're making progress towards getting them together for the intent of the board, for us to report back in,
Right.
year, or first part of next fiscal year on that. Couple of things we wanted to make sure we included. After the school year ended, so that they could be
Okay.
working on it, so they'll be an integral part of this particular work. I believe 3 educators, right?
Yes. Okay, anybody else? Thank you for coming, Senator, today. So, we're adjourned.